This guy is an insanely strong S-rank hunter. His name is Akabeni Muguru, and he has reached the pinnacle of power despite having the jobless class. His greatest goal in life is very simple: to use the ultimate reward to eradicate every dungeon in the world. He joined a guild to fight side by side with his comrades, believing it would protect his sister and help him survive this mission. At least that's what we used to think. This world is always cruel to the naive. I want to see those bastards pay for this. I can't take this anymore. Exactly 5 days before the truth was revealed at a colossal dungeon floating right above the Tokyo sky, Muguru proved why. Why he was a living legend. Drawing his sword from a spatial gate, he shot like a lightning bolt toward the giant serpent, using its own momentum to climb onto its body. A monster facing a beast. He gathered a massive amount of destructive lightning magic into his palm and unleashed a devastating blow, finishing the creature in a single strike. The entire guild celebrated this extraordinary victory, and his precious little sister Kana rushed to her brother's side. The entirety of Muguru's terrifying power stemmed from a blood-soaked vow made 3 years ago. Back then, his parents had sacrificed themselves fighting a pack of wild wolves so he could escape listening to his father's final screams and his mother's tears. He grasped Kana's hand tightly and fled, shouldering the responsibility of protecting his sister at any cost. He ran far, far away, and from that day on, he knew he would never be alone, for he carried the duty of protecting her. That was his reason to fight. And he thanked the guild for their excellent teamwork. They set up camp and began discussing how monsters had stopped appearing on the lower floors. No matter how many times he ate it, the hunter still found their rations bland. However, Muguru looked on the bright side. They were very nutritious. He knew that once they conquered this dungeon, they wouldn't have to live so meagerly anymore when the wars were over. Their wish would become a reality. His wish as a hunter was to wipe out every dungeon in this world forever. The guild members listened intently to his goal. 2 weeks later, the guild finally set foot on the dungeon's highest floor, encountering the boss, a colossal and terrifying red dragon. The whole guild bravely confronted it. As the dragon spewed scorching flames, our heroes led them to tactically surround the monster. The members followed orders and began a coordinated assault. Muguru noticed the dragon had let down its guard and was starting to shed scales, a clear weak point to focus on. He raised his sword, but he was caught off guard by a tail whip from the dragon that sent him flying. His sister ran over and immediately cast healing magic on him. This time, Muguru almost died. He thanked his sister for the healing and ordered the rear guard to focus on the dragon's eyes while the rest continued to attack its neck. After 2 weeks of fierce battle, he finally understood the true meaning of fighting as a team. Muguru, who had never had a comrade he could truly trust, absolutely now saw everyone fighting side by side with him. He had never put his complete faith in anyone other than Kana, but in that moment, he entrusted his very life to them. The fusion of sword and magic, a skill that only someone jobless like him could perform, that was his ultimate weapon. Focusing a massive amount of energy into his lightning-wreathed sword, he charged his ultimate attack and delivered the finishing blow to the dragon's neck. And at last it seemed to be defeated. But just as Muguru believed they had succeeded, and that the world would find peace, a devastating event occurred. A sword pierced through his chest, and Kana, his sister, couldn't stop it in time. Numb with pain, he wondered why this was happening. And the red-bearded man revealed a cruel truth: they had never considered him a friend. In the end, their views were completely opposed, and he had betrayed Muguru. While he wanted to erase all dungeons, the others vehemently opposed it, because they didn't want to lose the status they had worked so hard to build. Leaving Muguru to lie. Dying on the ground, the traitor explained that by protecting the world, S-rank hunters had gained immense fame in society. From the moment Muguru had expressed his intention to end the age of dungeons, they decided they had to finish him. Muguru understood their anger, but he couldn't comprehend why they would be so cruel to Kana. Their motive was simple: to stop her from interfering with their plans. Enraged and filled with a bone-deep hatred for his sister being killed for such a stupid reason, Muguru heard the hunters mock his meaningless idea of a perfect world. The red-bearded man concluded that this was the end, when a jobless person clashes with heroes. On his deathbed, Muguru knew he had chosen a class considered the most useless. Despite being deemed jobless, he had worked harder than anyone and become incredibly strong. He never imagined he would be mocked in his final moments. Feeling like a fool for trusting his comrades, he swore he would never forgive them for murdering Kana. He promised himself he would personally end every single person who betrayed him. Strangely, all that rage ignited a spark of hope, and then Muguru suddenly woke up. Startled awake in a bed, he wondered if what he'd just experienced was only a dream. Tears streamed down his face. He remembered every detail and was certain it was all real. He realized he was in a hospital when a nurse came in to check on him. To his shock, he realized he had woken up in the body of a young man, named Izumi. The doctor advised him to rest and recover for the next week. He wondered why he was in the hospital and noticed his wounds were all healed. He wondered why things had turned out this way, and why was he living in someone else's body? A weight lifted from his heart when he saw Kana. She called him Muguru, his real name. He broke down, overjoyed to have found his sister and to be recognized by her. Kana explained that after they were murdered, they were reincarnated into new bodies hundreds of years in the future. Although Kana looked exactly the same as in her past life, she had no memories at all. Muguru, on the other hand, retained all his memories, but his appearance was completely different. The original owner of this body was Izumi Muguru, a jobless hunter just like him before. Muguru also possessed fragments of the previous owner's life. Kana felt sad, thinking he had lost his memory, and pressed him about what had happened. She said that these wounds didn't look like they were from a monster attack, which made her extremely worried. Muguru apologized to his sister, and Kana was overjoyed to see him safe. He had promised to come back and visit him later. Based on this body's memories and what Kana had just told him, Muguru now fully understood his reality after clearing the sky dungeon Masubara. He and the 5 other heroes had wished to become dungeon masters. Now each one ruled over their own dungeon, becoming enemies to all of humankind. Only Muguru and Kana wished for a peaceful world. The other 6 heroes achieved immortality by becoming dungeon masters, allowing them to live for hundreds of years consumed by hatred. Muguru swore he would never forgive them. A few days later, Muguru wondered what the best way to enter a dungeon was. Kana found it ridiculous that her brother wanted to go to a dungeon right after being discharged from the hospital. However, after everything that had happened, he wanted to get stronger as quickly as possible because to take down the 6 traitors who were now dungeon masters, ordinary strength wasn't enough. Kana advised him to stop and try to understand why he was pushing himself so hard. Muguru explained that even though he was jobless and everything was the same as his previous life, a terrible class with not a single magical or sword skill, he still had his own way of handling things. He apologized to his sister and asserted that even a jobless has his own methods. Before Muguru could explain, someone appeared expressing surprise that he was still alive. The 2 of them sarcastically commented on how tough he was. Kana immediately asked if Muguru knew them. He replied that he did, recalling that these were the 2 who had beaten the body's original owner so badly he was hospitalized. The former owner of this body had also been betrayed in a dungeon. One of the 2 who had hospitalized Muguru's body's previous owner threatened him to shut up since he still had enough money to live a little longer. To thank him for lending him his body, Muguru promised himself he would get revenge for the previous owner. However, when Muguru asked them to do something, the 2 crazed hunters prepared to attack him once again. A D-rank hunter with massive arms charged wildly towards Muguru. As he threw a punch, he roared that an F-rank hunter had no hope of defeating him. Instantly, Muguru landed a direct hit before his enemy could, terrifying the man with his brutal strength. As the first guy collapsed, the other immediately drew a knife. Unwilling to be made a fool of, he lunged forward, intending to take Muguru's life. At the same time, Muguru realized his current body was much weaker than in his previous life. Even so, with his vast experience, he easily dealt with this small fry, catching the knife blade bare-handed with terrifying ease. He snatched the weapon from his enemy's hand and shattered the steel blade with just 2 fingers. In that moment, the 2 lowlifes were utterly terrified and scrambled to run away. Kana wondered in astonishment when her brother Muguru had become so strong. She felt as if her brother had become a completely different person, both in strength and demeanor. As for Muguru, he explained that although his body was physically weaker than before, he could now cast complex spells with his bare hands. He was certain that if he could restore his stats, he would be able to fulfill his thirst for revenge. To increase his stats properly, he planned to clear countless dungeons scattered across the world. Before defeating the 6 heroes, he needed to make sure he explored many other dungeons. Arriving at an E-rank dungeon, Muguru apologized to the hunters in the party waiting for him. This was a higher-level dungeon for him, as he was only an F-rank adventurer. Once all the members had gathered, they entered the dungeon, including Kana and Muguru. When the other hunters noticed Muguru and Kana's levels and stats, They shot them malicious glances. After stepping through the portal and arriving in a cave, they decided to discuss their attack plan. The party leader, a man with a scar over his eye, picked up a stalactite and declared that the reward for the finishing blow would belong to him and his buddy. Powerful and arrogant, he twisted his neck and asked if anyone dared to object. As the leader was about to discuss the vanguard formation, Maguru interrupted, asking if experience points weren't supposed to be shared equally among the whole party. Kana disliked Maguru's confrontational attitude, or with the strange hunters, but he insisted that he wanted his share of the reward. The party leader shot back that if a leader like him didn't land the finishing, then blow things could get very dangerous. He mocked Maguru for not knowing that, and for being a stupid F rank on top of it. Our hero replied that everything would be fine if they fought carefully. This only infuriated the party leader more. The leader swung his sword, not intending to kill Maguro, but to threaten him. Instantly pointing the sword tip at him, he shouted that a low-level jobless like Maguro shouldn't get cocky. The party leader's right-hand man then intervened. He asserted that in a dungeon, the boss's word was absolute. According to him, the weak should just obediently shut their mouths. He then placed a hand on Maguro's shoulder with a threatening look. He released strange purple flames, but he was immediately stopped by other members of the party. A young man with glasses told Maguro to just obey them even if he wanted to gain more experience. Maguro realized this wasn't the right place to argue or fight. The party leader with a giant sword on his back growled a warning for him to watch his mouth. Maguru realized the two hunters, the party leader and his right-hand man, were colluding to hoard all the treasure and experience in the dungeon. He noticed that these spoils were completely different from the rewards given by the Hunters Association. They were raw materials collected within the dungeon, and Maguru concluded that these guys had become far too greedy. At that very moment, the group encountered wild and crazed boars deep in the cave. The party leader ordered his men to charge and attack the 7 monsters. The weak and clumsy hunters moved forward and began attacking the enemy while the party leader, the hunter with the scar, patiently waited for the right opportunity to end the fight and claim the spoils. His buddy used fire magic to deliver the finishing blows. Maguru watched the scene with disgust, until a ferocious boar charged straight at him. With lightning-fast reflexes, he unleashed a spell from his palm as he jumped. Leaping over the boar, he released magic directly from his hand. The blast not only took down the monster attacking him, but also swept through and finished off several others, leaving the party leader in shock at the power. Such devastating power. However, a surviving boar charged and attacked the greedy party leader, injuring him in the stomach right then and there. The monster that attacked the party leader, now blown away by Maguro's magic, stood towering over him. Maguro ordered him to pick up his own loot, and the leader reluctantly complied. Even so, he stubbornly tried to salvage some of his arrogant pride, claiming he was more than capable of surviving even without the help of that jobless guy. Maguro then suggested that if the leader didn't trust his own abilities, he should just leave the party. Completely humiliated, the party leader tried to defuse the situation. He made excuses, claiming it was just an unforeseen accident. The mission continued, but the leader had clearly become wary of Maguro's presence and actions. In the final boss's chamber, deep at the end of the dungeon, the party leader, with an arrogant look on his face, began to hatch a scheme. He ordered Maguro to stand still in one spot, while the rest of the party, along with his crony, would follow him. Maguro didn't understand what the leader was planning, but the scar-faced hunter, his loyal henchman, insisted that he obey. The leader boastfully told Maguro not to worry, as he would quickly take care of the final boss with his own hands. And with a look of utter contempt, he loudly declared that lower-class people like Maguro should just obediently stand by, watch, and learn. That would be enough. Despite the order to stay put, Kana and Maguro decided to press forward. Upon reaching the final boss's room, they came across a gruesome sight, a giant creature resembling a wild boar. With sharp tusks and multiple eyes, it was devouring living creatures. The guild leader and his cronies, blinded by greed and the promise of a huge reward, charged forward to attack, showing off their swordsmanship and magic. They were trying to prove their strength to the rest of the team, as well as to Maguro and Kana for disobeying their orders. However, their display of power didn't last long. Through the smoke from their fire magic, they realized the monster was completely unharmed. The hideous creature flashed a cruel smile and launched a devastating attack, ripping one of the guild leader's arms clean off, sending him into a state of absolute panic. Next, The boar boss then cast a spell engulfing his crony in flames. Screaming in agony as his entire body was set ablaze, both of them were then snatched up by the monster, about to become its next meal. Paralyzed with terror, they couldn't react, and in an instant they became food for the giant creature. Before he died, the greedy guild leader cried and begged for his life, but it was all for nothing. The entire party watched in horror as the scene unfolded before them. Meguro recalled how the monsters in this dungeon were unusually strong, especially the final boss. It didn't match the guild's classification standards at all, leading him to conclude that this was a disguised dungeon. That would explain the creature's immense power. Without a moment's hesitation, he and Kana prepared for a tough battle. While the other members were panicked with no intention of fighting, Meguro drew his sword and declared that he would take down the monster himself. The other F-rank hunters were stunned as Meguro knew full well that since this was a disguised dungeon, the monster was actually C rank, not E rank. He ordered all members to remain silent as he began to charge into battle energy surging through his body as he dashed toward the monster at high speed. Vowing to himself that he would never trust anyone again, Meguro attacked the creature alone. He unleashed a series of lightning-fast sword strikes. After a flurry of slashes, he cast an ice spell from the palm of his hand, striking the hideous boar and dealing significant damage. However, the monster, with its sharp tusks and multiple eyes, began to cast a spell in retaliation. It fired the spell at Meguro, but he dodged it with ease, and he countered with another spell. When his magic hit its mark, it caused a massive explosion, but didn't deal the expected amount of damage. Meguro knew he couldn't finish this creature, this cunning beast, in a single blow with his current stats. He realized he couldn't win by fighting this way. He dodged another spell and skillfully evaded the boar's tusks. He jumped back to avoid a devastating blow, realizing that he needed to neutralize the creature's mobility. Observing the situation from midair, Meguro swung his sword down hard on the boar's knee, causing it to roar in pain. He immediately dashed to its other knee and delivered another slash, causing the monster to collapse to the ground. After immobilizing the boar, he realized that the spell he had cast earlier had served as a propulsion for his body. He cast the spell towards the ground again, and the force launched him high into the air far above the monster's height, nearly reaching the ceiling of the cave. He channeled magic and shot it straight at the stalactites. Giant shards of ice rained down on the vicious boar's head, crushing the monster and pinning its head deep into its own body. As Meguro struck down the creature, making good on his declaration, the entire party was utterly stunned. A brilliant blue light appeared, and they walked toward its source. In that moment, all of Meguro's stats increased by 5 points. It could be said that experience points are the greatest advantage for someone who is jobless. Kana, his younger sister, realized that her brother was now different from before. Meguro was startled when she vaguely sensed that he was a different person inside that body. She asked him not to lie to her, saying there was no way he could have become so strong in such a short amount of time. Therefore, she was convinced he had always been hiding his true power, and she wondered why he would do such a thing. Our hero, realizing she hadn't yet discovered his deepest secret, patted her on the head and said that he had been secretly training all this time just to protect her. Meguro swore to himself that he would never let the tragedy of his past life repeat itself. He then told them it was time to leave the dungeon and report back to the Hunters Guild. They arrived at the Shizuku branch of the Hunters Guild, where the female receptionist couldn't believe that a C-rank dungeon boss had been defeated by someone who was jobless, especially when that same boss had already wiped out 2 D-rank adventurers. However, Kana insisted that she had seen the whole thing with her own eyes. The receptionist thought the story was ridiculous, implying that the 2 adventurers had probably been backstabbed after they had already defeated the boss. He realized that the idea of a jobless person single-handedly defeating the association wouldn't take kindly to a boss monster, and Kana shouted that they would never do such a thing, and she demanded they re-verify the story. Izumi Meguro explained that the hunters had lost their lives because they'd let their guard down for just a second inside the dungeon. He bluntly stated that the secretaries were disrespecting the 2's deaths. Ashamed, the secretaries immediately apologized, saying they didn't mean it that way. Meguro then challenged them to consider how much effort the hunters had put in to take down the monster if they still doubted his words. Afterward, Izumi Meguro left the building and coincidentally ran into the Hunters Association's branch chief. The branch chief stared at the young man with a peculiar look. While his secretary tried to get his attention, the branch chief seemed to recognize Izumi, but Izumi himself wondered who the man was. As for Kana, she wondered if it was really okay to just leave the branch like that. But Izumi didn't care about taking credit for what he'd done. In that moment, Kana realized he was still the same Izumi Meguro from the old days, bringing back memories of when the two were next-door neighbors. Later, while lying in bed, Izumi fumbled with a modern smartphone and realized just how much technology had advanced since his time. Suddenly, he received an urgent news alert: Masabara was coming to Japan. Remembering the man's face, the rage inside Izumi boiled over, though he was also strangely eager at the thought of their upcoming reunion. Meanwhile, in China, Masabara received news that the other dungeon masters were stagnating after hundreds of years. He felt his time had finally come. His worried butler advised him to be extremely cautious before leaving. But Masabara, brimming with overconfidence, assured him that nothing would happen. Masabara, one of the 6 heroes, then reassured his butler that he would take care of everything. During his absence hundreds of years ago, Masabara had become the master of an S-rank dungeon and used its power to conquer all of China. Now, to continue expanding his territory, he needed to take Japan before the other heroes defeated him and stole what was his. Once seated in his car, he ordered his troops to assemble immediately, and he threatened his subordinate, telling him not to screw things up. Back at the Hunters Association, Izumi Meguro was trying to recruit new members but was facing immense difficulty. His F-rank and unemployed status were major obstacles to recruitment. As an adventurer, he had no choice but to clear dungeons to build his reputation. And to find a dungeon, no matter how difficult, he first needed to get out of F-rank. Kana then asked him how he was supposed to rank up if he couldn't take on dungeon clearing missions. While his sister was complaining about this hypocrisy, the branch chief suddenly appeared. Hearing their complaints, the branch chief showed his understanding, and he apologized for his staff's rudeness. He then informed Izumi that he could take a special test to rank up. He explained that once a month, a hunter skill evaluation test was held in the underground facility to help hunters rank up more easily if they passed. Although it was an extremely difficult test, he still advised Meguro to give it a try because if he failed, he could either retake it or meet the normal requirements to rank up. Realizing that even with a very low pass rate there was no harm in trying, Izumi decided to agree. His staff member then wondered why he had suggested that particular special test, especially since no one had ever passed it before. In response, the branch chief declared that Izumi Meguro might just be the first person to pass this test. 3 days later, Izumi Meguro, along with other hunters, entered the association's underground facility. The test seemed simple: defeat the monsters that would appear in the room. These monsters were created from the magical energy of a dungeon's magic stone. They could feel pain when hit, but wouldn't die even from a fatal blow. If the hunters defeated them, the monster would turn to dust and disappear. After finishing the explanation, the instructor asked who wanted to go first. Just then, a knight in full plate armor stepped up to be the first. As he approached the magic stone, a giant green snake burst out from it. The knight let out a loud cry and swung his sword, unleashing a powerful blow, brimming with confidence in his victory. However, the monster's scales were too hard for his sword to penetrate. Then in a flash, the giant snake lunged forward and slammed the knight hard against the wall. The other hunters were stunned by the defeat of one of the strongest warriors there. They thought it was impossible to win, because this was an A-rank monster. Right after, the instructor spoke up, asking if there were any other candidates, and Izumi Meguro raised his hand to the astonishment of all the adventurers and his sister Kana. He confidently strode into the arena, weapon in hand. He faced off against a white lion, and immediately charged straight at it. At that moment, the monster gathered a fireball in its mouth. Meguro dodged the scorching stream of fire, and just as he landed, a claw swipe came right at him. Reacting with lightning speed, he used his sword to block the giant lion's fangs and claws. He knew full well that even a single scratch would mean the end of the test, because this monster possessed terrifying strength and speed. However, Izumi Meguro knew exactly how to handle this situation, and he didn't hesitate to charge forward with his sword. After landing a critical slash on the beast's leg, the enraged lion unleashed another stream of fire toward Izumi. Meguro immediately activated his eye skill, which allowed him to see his opponent's weak points. Ever since conquering the previous dungeon, his stats had increased significantly, allowing him to execute more spectacular physical moves than ever before. With just the weapon in his hand, he unleashed a series of slashes that tore through, the magical flames causing them to dissipate with unbelievable ease. Thanks to his enhanced magic speed, Meguro could now appear and disappear wherever he wanted. Just as the giant lion was about to unleash another fireball, Maguru condensed purple magic into his palm. He was able to do this thanks to a special skill. Belonging to his jobless class, the higher his stats grew, the more omnipotent he became. And so he launched the stream of magic from his hand, confronting the lion's flames head-on, crushing it in the blink of an eye. A colossal magical explosion erupted from the impact, and Izumi Maguro emerged from the test as the victor. A few minutes later, he received his hunter card with a rank of 1. Kana, his younger sister, burst into tears of joy seeing her brother pass the special exam. After all, Maguru was the first and only one to pass. However, our protagonist had no idea that no one else had passed. He had fallen for the branch manager's lie. Suddenly, men in black suits and sunglasses approached him. They recognized Izumi Maguro and ordered him to come with them. Maguro flatly replied that he'd never met them before. Kana, visibly scared and worried, begged her big brother to come home soon. To reassure his little sister that he'd be back as soon as he could, he gave her a protective charm. But his sister couldn't accept it. She burst into tears, terrified, and begged him not to go. After a shady car ride, they brought him to a highly suspicious underground area. They stopped in front of a door, and as soon as it opened, Izumi immediately asked why the man had tricked him into coming here. The old man with the long hair and beard just laughed, saying the reason wasn't all that important. He then opened a briefcase full of money, revealing his intention to sponsor our protagonist, the old man's henchman. They had witnessed him during the special test, and Maguro could now see millions of yen laid out before him. The old man offered a price of 100 million yen per month. His proposition was for Izumi to become a kind of bodyguard for him. Explaining further, the old man said they represent a large-scale organization. They provide all sorts of services, and he quickly understood that the old man wouldn't say another word unless he took the money. To carry out his plan of revenge against those 6 heroes, Maguro needed time and, above all, money. He craved money more than anything, but he absolutely refused to be someone else's puppet. Our hero turned his back, clearly stating that he could not accept the sponsorship at this time. However, the door remained locked shut, and the henchman declared that since he'd refused the offer, he wouldn't be leaving here alive. One of the old man's subordinates lunged forward with a punch that in Izumi Maguro's eyes looked as slow as a crawling turtle. But to his surprise, the punch landed squarely in his stomach, shaking him with its unexpected power and precision. The subordinate explained that the oxygen level in the room had been reduced. He boasted that the hallway earlier had an air supply, but this special environment had none. He added that no one would have enough oxygen in here, unless they possessed a magic gold ring, as it was a magic tool. The protagonist finally understood why they brought him to this place. He stood up, realizing he had fallen into a trap. However, he asserted that they had only slowed him down a little, and that he still had more than enough strength to fight. The enemy called him a stubborn fool who was about to die and didn't know his place, but this time the protagonist landed a devastating punch, right in the opponent's face. This stunned everyone, and one of the thugs grabbed a dagger and charged at Maguro while his senses were weakened. He decided not to get close, instead launching a kick at the man with the dagger. Fighting while strategizing, he finished the enemy with a follow-up punch. Right after the kick, the remaining thugs all rushed Izumi at once. The result was, the protagonist defeated all 3 of them in just a few seconds. Even though they were weak, the lead thug never expected he could take down a total of 6 opponents. In any case, they were no match for him. The man had just taken off his outer jacket, revealing a muscular physique, consumed by a mad rage. He then picked up an axe. Veins bulged all over his body. He slammed the giant axe into the ground, and our protagonist dodged to the side. Maguro realized that the Berserker class reduces intelligence and speed, in exchange for a massive increase in power. He had witnessed an extremely powerful Berserker in his previous life, and in this case, he felt pity for the guy. Our hero used the wall to push off and evade the enemy's powerful but predictable attacks. He knew full well the weakness of a Berserker. It's their extremely low magic resistance. He couldn't compare to the jobless one who was boosted in both mobility and magical attack power. Maguro then unleashed a powerful magic attack aimed directly at the enemy, who was red with rage. The attack struck his body, dealing massive damage, causing the monster to collapse to the ground. The only downside was the amount of energy he had consumed. Afterwards, the old man spoke up, congratulating him and saying he had been expecting such a performance from a hunter as interesting as this, though he had far exceeded his expectations. The protagonist, now fed up with the trouble, ordered the old man to open the door immediately. Contrary to Maguru's expectations, The strange old man still wouldn't open the door. Instead, he revealed that Izumi also had a weakness, simultaneously showing him camera footage of Kana being gagged. Meguru instantly understood that they had followed his sister all the way home. Realizing the old man's impulsive subordinates had made this whole mess. Meguru felt an intense rage surge within him as he saw the old man's thugs. With his sister who was desperately crying and screaming for help, the image of her begging for help shook him to his core, leaving him unsure how to react. The arrogant subordinates declared that they had orders from their boss to do whatever they wanted, and therefore they would take full advantage of Kana's presence as they tried to have their way with her. The little girl screamed for them to stop, but Kana quickly activated a magic circle that repelled the attackers and managed to free herself from her restraints. She then attacked her enemies, realizing at that moment the presence of the protective talisman her brother had given her. She understood that Meguru Izumi had saved her life. The old man was astonished, wondering what had happened when he saw the little girl free herself and defeat his thugs. He revealed that he had anticipated such a situation, so he had crafted a talisman from the spoils of a disguised dungeon. He explained that this magic item was forged with special stones. It could be activated remotely because he had created a device that would automatically trigger the instant Kana was in danger. He boasted that this talisman was as effective as an item created by a professional alchemist, and for a jobless person like him, crafting a cheap imitation was an easy task. After this tense situation, the old man finally opened the door for Meguru before leaving. The young hunter pressed the old man on why he had targeted him, to which the eccentric man replied that it was for a test. Meguru then asked a more specific question. Why had he chosen a hunter like him, who was also going through a hard time and just wanted to live an honest life? The old man answered that he needed more strong people, and was recruiting hunters for a special figure. When pressed on who this special figure was, Meguru pointed his sword straight at the man, demanding he tell him immediately. Threatened, the old man finally revealed the truth, saying it was for Masubara Miyoshi, the former hero. Meguru asked what reason Masubara had for assembling such a fighting force. Terrified and threatened, the old man desperately confessed that he truly didn't know the reason. At that moment, Meguru understood the situation and gave the old man an order to never bother him or Kana again, to make sure the old man remembered his lesson. He left a small cut on the man's face before turning and walking through the door. As soon as he got home, Meguru, extremely worried, asked Kana if she was okay. The little girl hugged her brother tightly, assuring him she wasn't hurt. In turn, Meguru apologized for leaving her home alone, having to entrust her safety to the talisman. Kana asked him if he was going to report this to the police. However, Meguru explained that once Masubara got involved, the police would be powerless. The girl was stunned to learn that one of the 6 famous heroes was involved in this. Her brother then told Kana to pack her things because they would have to move. It would be too dangerous for her to live alone. He insisted that they had to move immediately, and until they found a new place, she could stay with him. Kana felt flustered by the situation, but on the other hand, she mentioned that he had a double bed. Meguru casually reassured her that it wasn't a problem for his sister to stay over since he cared deeply for Kana, and that it was only natural for family to live together. The girl readily accepted his offer to stay with him. Meanwhile, at the base where the old man was, the former hero Masubara Mizuki became enraged upon seeing that his henchmen had been defeated. The old man knelt down, apologizing for his failure to recruit the hunter. Masubara was furious about the failure. He grabbed the old man's hair and demanded information about the hunter. The old man revealed that his name was Izumi Meguru and that he was a nobody. However, upon hearing the name, the former hero seemed to remember something and threw the old man, causing him to fall to the floor. Masubara, also known as the Dungeon Lord, remembered hearing about Meguru, that he was ridiculously strong and from the jobless class. He knew that normally he would take care of this himself, but this time, he decided to investigate Meguru, thoroughly determined to find out everything about him by any means necessary. The next day, Kana woke up in the double bed beside Meguru. She tried to wake him, but seeing he was still asleep, she put on her shoes and went outside. The moment she opened the door, she noticed a strange purple magical energy floating in the air. Meguru woke up, and upon seeing the magical energy, he couldn't believe that a dungeon gate could appear right here. Judging by the energy intensity, this was probably a C-rank dungeon. He told Kana to wait in the room until he got back, but she refused, saying he couldn't go alone. Seeing Kana's firm insistence on going with him, Meguru relented, and the two of them entered the dungeon. A while later, they had defeated the creatures inside. However, Kana realized that she hadn't been any help at all. Muguru then asked her to use Abyss Magic, a legendary skill capable of lowering all of a target's stats. Lacking confidence, Kana said she could never use such powerful magic. After all, the only hero who could manipulate the Abyss was the legendary Kana, from hundreds of years ago a legendary brave priestess. Kana, on the other hand, was just an ordinary priest, and the gap between them seemed impossible to bridge. However, seeing that his sister had lost her memories, Izumi was certain he could help her restore them. Suddenly, a dog-like monster appeared, taking them by surprise. As it appeared, Izumi declared that there were others besides the Kana of old who could use that power. He quickly used a spell to bind the monster and finished it off with a precise kick. Afterwards, he explained to his sister that the greatest advantage of the jobless class was the freedom to do a bit of everything, even if they were just weaker versions of the original heroine's skills. Model. Kana was also capable of using Abyss Magic. Kana, who hadn't known her brother's job was so versatile, suddenly felt motivated as Izumi encouraged her to press on. He told her that she could do it too, but Kana kept putting herself down, believing she wasn't capable, and that he was the special one. So Izumi explained it thoroughly. He said that all she needed to do was envision the outcome and gather the necessary elements. Once a technique is engraved upon the soul, it's not easily lost. He insisted that she had already mastered the basics. She just needed to try and believe in herself, suggesting that perhaps she didn't need to create a complex spell but just chain simple ones together. Just as Izumi warned his sister that some wild dogs were approaching, Kana opened her eyes, focused intently, and cast Abyss Magic, a blue orb of energy. Trapped the three dogs, and she could hardly believe that she'd actually succeeded. Izumi congratulated her and took the opportunity. He offered to teach her enhancement and adjustment magic. Kana thought the idea was crazy since these spells were notoriously difficult, but she decided to try anyway. Just then, the dungeon boss, a giant dog, appeared. It lunged to attack, but Izumi nimbly dodged to the side. The second spell Kana learned from Izumi was enhancement. It was similar to Abyss Magic, but increased stats instead of decreasing them. She cast it on Izumi. He immediately moved faster, his entire body enveloped in a brilliant light. Approaching the giant dog, Izumi placed his hand on the ground and cast a fire spell. Flames began to erupt, incinerating the monster and defeating it in an instant. Kana then realized she could be useful to Izumi and that the two of them made a great team. The jobless boy was also surprised at how much easier the battle was than he had imagined. It was all thanks to her help. The only thing that bothered him was that Kana's stats should have increased after conquering the dungeon, but that didn't happen. Suddenly, a surge of energy appeared before them, looking like a portal, and also an exit. Kana had never seen anything like it. But Izumi quickly deduced that this might be a double dungeon, an extremely rare phenomenon where one dungeon is located inside another. He explained that the magical energy in the second dungeon was denser, so the monsters would be much stronger. It was likely a B-rank dungeon, and if they couldn't clear it, they wouldn't receive any rewards at all. However, Kana saw a B-rank dungeon as a devastating natural disaster on par with a meteor. She felt the situation was too dangerous even for Izumi and urged him to leave. But Izumi was completely confident in Kana's support spells and was certain they were strong enough to take on this second dungeon. So Izumi stepped into the newly appeared portal, but something unexpected happened. A deep chasm opened up between them, making Izumi extremely worried for Kana. He tried to reach for her as giant rocks came crashing down around them. He screamed in despair, fearing Kana had been buried and crushed by the rubble. He began frantically punching at the giant rocks, determined to save his sister. Amidst the messy pile of rock and dirt, he found Kana still alive and crying for help. Despite being pinned by a few rocks, she was conscious, and Izumi quickly pulled her out. Kana recounted that she survived thanks to the enhancement magic he had taught her, even though the experience was utterly terrifying. After a relieved hug, Izumi was overjoyed that he had taught her. The stat-boosting spell had ultimately saved her life. He found the sudden cave-in very strange and suspected it was caused by someone's magic. Anxiously, he wondered if someone else was watching them in this dungeon. Although he thought it was impossible, they both stepped through the gate into the second dungeon. Just as he predicted, this dungeon was much tougher than the last one. Izumi was silently grateful that he had taught Kana those spells, because thanks to her, his stats had increased significantly. Even so, he knew he still hadn't reached the level necessary to get revenge on those heroes. Kana noticed he seemed worried about something, but Izumi lied, saying he was just excited about the rewards they would get after clearing this place. They then headed straight for the boss room, which he believed would be easy to clear as long as they were together. Finally, upon opening the boss room door, they came face to face with a three-headed dog, Cerberus. The ferocious three-headed dog lunged forward, ready to unleash deadly magic attacks. Izumi Meguro, our hero, asked Kana to cast a protection spell on him. She immediately cast 2 spells on him, and he charged straight towards the monstrous dog. Dodging the first attack, Meguro leaped onto the giant Cerberus and stood right in front of its 3 heads. He was nearly hit by its giant claws, but jumped back and dodged at the last second. As expected of a B-rank boss, the creature managed to leave a scratch on his face. Despite recognizing the enemy's strength, Meguro didn't give up and continued to evade its attacks. He thought to himself that even the toughest-skinned wolves must have a weak point like their throat. Meguro pulled out a dagger and threw it, but the creature bit down and shattered his weapon. Realizing Cerberus's incredibly fast reflexes, he concluded that he needed to move even faster than the monster. Although he acknowledged the enemy's overwhelming power, Izumi knew he could defeat it thanks to Kana's support spells. He recalled that anyone who wanted to become a hunter had to master one of the natural elements, or light and darkness. However, with his jobless class, he possessed the rare ability to use all elements. Channeling magic and all the elements into his body, Meguro dashed towards Cerberus, easily dodging its attacks. Through friction, he combined earth and wind magic to create plasma energy, preparing to attack the monster. He unleashed 2 powerful slashes of plasma, enveloping and slicing off all 3 of Cerberus's heads with a single blow. He had defeated the dungeon boss, causing it to collapse and be completely annihilated on the spot. Your stats increase, and you receive a reward, a card that allows you to continuously enter C-rank dungeons. Izumi Meguro says he only has minor scratches while secretly hiding the card, so that Kana won't see it. Right behind him, a hidden figure has been observing the entire battle and concludes that Izumi Meguro is much stronger than he had imagined. This man is a mercenary reporting to Masubara, the one who hired him to investigate the kid. He reports that Meguro is incredibly talented, able to clear a dungeon all by himself. Created by a jobless former hero, someone with a normal class would never have the skills to survive and leave a place like that. The mercenary assesses that Meguro seems very experienced, proving he's been through countless hardships despite his young age. He is absolutely certain that this kid is fully capable of ranking up to A rank. However, he has one very clear weakness if Masubara knows how to exploit it. Meguro will become weaker than even an E-rank hunter. The Dungeon Master realizes that the decision to investigate the main character was an incredibly wise move. Afterwards, the mercenary receives a briefcase containing far more money than originally agreed upon, serving as payment for the completed mission, as well as an advance for the next job. He knows they're paying him to eliminate Meguro, and considers it a simple matter because he is the great A-rank Saito. Masubara hands the mercenary a legendary sword. He ponders for a moment, then takes it. In the end, he accepts the mission and the sword with a wicked smile. Meanwhile, at home, Izumi Meguro has never seen a dungeon ticket before. He wonders how this magical item works, the thing he still hasn't shown his little sister. In his current state, a C-rank dungeon should be incredibly easy. He focuses his magic and activates the item to see how it works. Instantly, he's teleported to an island, a dungeon he's never seen before. Moreover, there's no exit in sight, and he won't be able to leave until he defeats the boss. A message appears announcing that the first daily quest has begun with a total of 100 monsters. Meguro is shocked to see a horde of monsters rushing toward him. He knows this fight is going to take a lot of energy. He begins to wipe out the monsters on the island, including some giant crabs. In just a moment, he has eliminated the required number of monsters and completed the daily quest. However, just as he's exhausted, a new greater danger emerges from underground. The ground cracks open to reveal a monster far stronger than the previous enemies. A giant lobster with a hard shell on its back. It's clearly the boss, but in the end it's just a C-rank boss. With his current strength, it's not difficult to deal with. Unleashing an extremely powerful fire magic, Meguro launches it like a violent storm, blowing the lobster away. The reward is another dungeon ticket, and a potion that fully restores his health. Unlike other places that would increase his stats upon clearing, he takes the potion and his body begins to dissolve into countless particles of light as he leaves. Returning home where Kana is still sound asleep, completely unaware her brother was ever gone. Furthermore, this dungeon ticket didn't disappear after use. At the same time, at the Hunter Association, everyone is astonished by Meguro's appearance, though he doesn't understand why either. Kana explains that he is classless, but passed a special test. Everyone finds this incredibly interesting, something the main character hadn't expected at all. The two siblings are given a special mission: find Saito and enter a dungeon. Saito has been looking for Meguro, and the receptionist guesses that he attracted attention during the test. Our hero accepts the mission because Saito wanted to speak with him. A while later, Izumi Meguro meets Saito, who greets him and acknowledges his strength. The other two party members are just there to meet the quota for the reward, so they play a minor role. On the other hand, Meguro and Saito fight side by side against the monsters in the dungeon. During the fight, Meguro exclaims that Saito is the second highest ranked person, just behind the 6 heroes. At that very moment, a lizard monster tries to attack him, but it's instantly incinerated by our hero. Saito observes the scene. He realizes Meguro's power, confirming the rumors about him. Now that he's seen it with his own eyes, he fully understands the boy's strength, a sinister look on his face. Saito thinks to himself, someone this strong could surely clear this dungeon all by himself. After that, he informs Meguro that he and the others will handle collecting all the loot so as not to attract attention. Meguro doesn't understand Saito's true intentions. He even feels grateful for the extra experience from having an A-rank hunter on the team. While continuing to kill dungeon monsters, Meguro asks Saito why he wanted him and the team. The high-rank hunter gives an unpredictable smile, draws a special sword, and in a flash lunges straight at the main character, betraying Meguro. Saito reveals his true motive is to eliminate him. Our hero, with his sharp reflexes, dodges to the side, avoiding the fatal blow and emerging unharmed. The other team members are shocked by their captain's actions. Without hesitation, he orders them all to be silent, then slashes one of them in the leg, feeling regret for not having eliminated these minor obstacles earlier. Without mercy, he slaughters the remaining team members, declaring that he has no time to waste and needs to eliminate Meguro as quickly as possible. With a terrifying aura, Saito charges again, causing Meguro to instinctively protect Kana. He tells his sister to get back so he can handle the situation alone, showing the gravity of the encounter. Meguro tells himself that he's never faced a life-or-death battle this intense before. Facing the enemy alone, he focuses all his power into his fist and launches an attack. He knows a battle like this is inevitable on his path of revenge, and holding his head high, he unleashes a purple magic attack at Saito, creating a magical explosion. However, what surprises him is the villain survived, emerging from the smoke completely unharmed. Saito calmly lit a cigarette and said he held no grudge against Meguro, explaining that he was only following Masubara's orders. He told Meguro not to hold it against him, then lunged forward, unleashing a series of incredibly precise sword strikes. In the midst of their deathmatch, Saito revealed that Masubara had a special interest in Meguro. It seemed he felt threatened by the boy's growing power. Suddenly, Saito vanished, then reappeared, delivering a powerful kick straight into Meguro's stomach, an attack he never saw coming. Our protagonist couldn't react in time and collapsed to the ground, severely weakened. The exhaustion that had been building up on his journey was now holding him back, and finally he understood why. Saito had let him clear out all the monsters up until this point. Though exhausted, Meguro told himself that he absolutely could not die here, because he still had to protect his little sister Kana. He didn't want to relive the painful memories of the past or let that tragedy repeat itself. So he focused on the present and awakened an extraordinary inner power. He charged at his target with terrifying speed, making even Saito wary. Meguro executed a series of lightning-fast movements, appearing directly behind his enemy in an instant. Stunned, Saito tried to counter, but our hero was faster, landing a punch that knocked him down. It was clear the kid was getting stronger with every passing moment. Saito revealed that he had prepared something for this very situation, because he had anticipated this possibility. In a desperate move, he grabbed Kana and held a sword to her throat. Sato knew full well that Kana was Meguro's weakness, so he demanded the boy follow his orders if he didn't want his sister to die. In that situation, before he could take out his target, Kana would be killed. This left Meguro conflicted, unsure of what to do. Moreover, he was completely exhausted, which was impairing both his thinking and his strength. Taking out a magic potion, he decided to bet everything on it. If he were at his peak, he was certain he would be faster and stronger than his enemy. Immediately after drinking the yellow potion, his body reacted extremely well and his speed increased astonishingly. With a vicious kick, Meguro sent Saito's sword flying, disarming him. In the blink of an eye, he was standing right behind his enemy. Our hero then declared that Saito shouldn't have underestimated him now that he was back in top form. Turning the tables, Maguru unleashed a magic attack straight at Saito's head, finishing off his foe. Kana let out a sigh of relief. She began chanting a healing spell to save the party members who had been attacked by Saito. She confirmed they were still breathing and needed to be taken to a hospital immediately. Maguru hesitated, unsure if they should leave right away or clear the dungeon first before heading to the exit. After all, clearing this area would be quick with the special sword he had just taken from his enemy. He had felt a strange energy when Saito used it, but now he couldn't feel anything. Entering the boss room, he came face to face with a giant lizard with crystals on its head. Not wanting to waste time with this creature, he swung his sword in a single slash that split it in two. After defeating the monster, he received an additional 50 points to all his stats. After the battle, Izumi Maguro not only obtained the mission badge, but also noticed the appearance of a strange mark on the palm of his hand, wondering about its meaning. Meanwhile, the secretaries at the Hunters Association could hardly believe their eyes. They were shocked at the thought that a monster could defeat a top-tier A-rank hunter like Saito. In response to their disbelief, Maguro casually stated that it was common for hunters to die in dungeons. After thinking for a long while, Maguro decided to keep the secret of Saito's true death, fabricating stories that matched the fates of the two survivors. However, the association secretaries still found it hard to believe. Because Saito was famous for his extraordinary strength and outstanding talent, he had single-handedly cleared all sorts of dungeons and had even won the Dragon King Festival, a prestigious event where hunters competed against each other. Hearing the secretary's persistent questioning, Maguru unleashed a threatening aura, frightening her into reluctantly considering the possibility that someone in the group had backstabbed him. To prevent the accusations from going any further, Izumi Maguro questioned her reason for making that assumption. He asked if she truly believed that any member of the team had the guts to do such a thing. Completely subdued, the young woman hastily apologized because she herself found it unbelievable that anyone would have the strength to take down Saito. Recalling the magic Maguru had used to defeat the A-rank hunter, he claimed he was exhausted and left with Kana. His sister had wanted to tell the truth, but he stopped her, because he believed that getting the police involved would only turn the situation into a complete mess. When Kana asked the real reason for his silence, he lied, saying that the death of Saito was the hunter's own fault, and Maguru had no reason to take responsibility. The dungeon had disappeared after being cleared, leaving no evidence for the police to investigate. However, the real reason behind hiding it from the association was that Maguru didn't want to attract any unwanted attention. He was already being watched because of the promotion exam, and Masubara had already been keeping a close eye on him. Right now, Maguru just wanted to avoid any trouble so he could focus completely on his plan for revenge. Suddenly, Maguru began to feel an intense headache and dizziness. This made Kana extremely worried. After that spell, he lay down in bed to rest and took some medicine. Maguru believed that these symptoms were a direct consequence of taking a life. He had never killed anyone before, and at that moment, he had no other choice. He had never felt so terrible, realizing this was the steep price for taking another person's life. However, he knew he had to face this reality, because the next step would be to eliminate the 6 heroes. Shortly after, Kana brought in a bowl of soup for him to eat since Maguru couldn't take his medicine on an empty stomach. He thanked his sister and ate the soup, which helped him recover. Feeling his body had healed, Maguru realized Kana hadn't changed at all and possessed all the qualities of a high-level healer. He guessed that she must have subconsciously cast some kind of healing magic. As he ate the soup she'd quickly prepared, the little girl realized her brother was tormented by having killed Saito, so she comforted him, saying he was just protecting everyone, and that it wasn't his fault, so he shouldn't worry so much. Maguru didn't want to burden his sister, but Kana's support was incredibly important to him right then. Kana noticed the mark on Maguru's palm, which he explained had appeared on its own. Suddenly, he felt that the mark seemed fainter than the last time he'd seen it. Meanwhile, Masubara felt guilty for dragging Saito into this situation. After all, he was his capable right-hand man. Thanks to Saito, Masubara had been able to build a solid foundation in Japan, surpassing the other heroes. Of all the mercenaries available for hire in Japan, Saito was undoubtedly the strongest. The fact that some brat named Izumi Maguro could kill him made Masubara question his true identity. He didn't care who Maguro really was. He just knew he couldn't let him be because he was a genuine threat. Masubara also considered the possibility that Saito had revealed to Maguru that he was the one behind everything. Before the situation could get any worse, Masubara decided he would eliminate the protagonist, just as he had done to That person, hundreds of years ago. At the same time, Maguru woke up and noticed the mark on his hand had vanished, which left him completely bewildered. Kana also woke up and asked if he was feeling any better. Maguru immediately replied that he was fine. Knowing that Kana wasn't experienced enough to protect herself, Maguru wondered if he should take her with him today. Picking up a dungeon ticket, he told his sister to follow him for a moment, surprising her with this sudden change. She asked what was going on when her brother invited her into a dungeon. She thought he was still too sick to fight the very next day, but Maguru explained that the one fighting, and wouldn't be him but her. The two of them were teleported inside, and Maguru began training his sister so she could survive on her own. She had to face countless difficulties. To stay alive, and after a long, grueling day of magic training, she felt exhausted. However, Kana managed to complete the system's daily quest. The dungeon rewarded her with a charm that prevents instant death and a B-rank dungeon ticket. Seeing the two rewards Kana received, Maguru was incredibly excited, especially about the charm. It could instantly nullify a fatal attack. Maguru was certain this item would be extremely useful in the future. Shortly after, when Maguru and Kana returned to the Hunters Guild, they were informed that the branch manager wanted to speak with them. Without beating around the bush, he revealed he knew Maguru had eliminated Saito, an A-rank hunter. The branch manager concluded that a monster from a dungeon couldn't possibly have killed Saito, and with many dark rumors spreading about what really happened to him, he came to suspect the protagonist. However, the branch manager didn't believe Maguru had set a trap for Saito. On the contrary, he believed Saito was the one who attacked first. Furthermore, this situation showed that Maguru was strong enough, possessing a formidable talent that could bridge any difference in rank. In response, Kana chimed in, insisting the branch manager was exaggerating because Maguru was just a low-level jobless person and couldn't possibly have done something so astounding. However, the branch manager revealed he'd heard stories of a jobless hero who existed hundreds of years ago, and he suspected Maguru was the reincarnation of that person. Even so, he also mused that it wouldn't be strange if another jobless person with such terrifying power appeared. Maguru realized how shrewd the branch manager was. It seemed he didn't care at all whether Saito had been killed or not. If Maguru was truly strong enough to accomplish such a feat, he wanted to make a special request. The mission in question was in an area under the jurisdiction of the Siberian Hunters Guild. The request was for Maguru to help the neighboring guild conquer a newly appeared dungeon. Currently, the highest level dungeons are A rank, and the local guild was gathering its strongest hunters to deal with it. However, they were still very apprehensive and had specifically requested Maguru to join the team. Kana was also part of the mission. She was happy to be on the main team, especially since so many people would be participating in that A-rank dungeon mission. Maguru reassured Kana that she would be fine. Afterward, the two of them apologized to the other team members who were waiting. A group of 3 girls welcomed the new reinforcements. The knight Nozomi Sakuragi expressed her opinion that they should have handled the situation themselves, considering the guild's intervention unnecessary. However, the mage Mihara and the warrior Umichi disagreed with her. They seemed quite pleased with the arrival of reinforcements. Nozomi then told them not to get in her way and meticulously asked about each person's rank and hunter class. Kana replied that she was a D-rank cleric, while Maguru revealed he was also just a D-rank with no job. Realizing they were both low-ranked, the knight declared that they could rely on her skills. She added that Maguru's jobless class would be useless no matter how good his skills were. Stepping closer to Maguru, Nozomi warned that if he slacked off in the dungeon, he would be eliminated. However, the mage Mihara thought Nozomi had gone too far with her advice, which sounded more like a threat. Faced with this tense situation, Kana immediately stood close to Maguru. As for the knight Nozomi, she knew that overestimating one's own abilities could lead to a tragic end. And if that happened, the pain would fall not only on the person involved, but also on those who care about them. It was for this very reason that Nozomi spoke up, expressing her concern for the protagonist's life. Maguru and Kana also sensed a storm was brewing, a sign that the situation was about to get very bad. Our hero then spoke words of reassurance to Kana, encouraging her to keep moving forward. He assured her that she was very strong and that everything would be all right, and she should believe in him, not paying any mind to what the others on the team said. As soon as they entered the dungeon, they encountered a fearsome-looking minotaur. Without hesitation, the warrior Umichi charged the creature with his giant axe, landing a powerful blow. The strike knocked the minotaur to the ground, and the mage Mihara seized the opportunity to cast a fire spell on it. Finally, Nozomi rushed forward with her sword and finished off the giant creature. The mage Mihara remarked that this A-rank dungeon didn't seem much different from a B-rank one. Although the monsters were quite tough, they could still control the situation and should maintain their formation to win. As they decided to move on to the next monster, they realized that the weak guards Muguru and Kana had followed them all the way here. The girls immediately pushed Muguru and Kana back, as several minotaurs began to appear, making the situation dangerous. Even the experienced hunters started to retreat. Panicked by the overwhelming number of minotaurs, the pink-haired girl Nozomi thought they couldn't hold them off any longer. However, Muguru and his little sister Kana began to prepare for battle. The main character launched a kick followed by a precise slash at one of the minotaurs, winning in the blink of an eye. The other members of the group, not expecting such a performance from the reinforcements, were incredibly impressed. Nozomi, who had previously seen him as a weakling, was even more so. And unable to understand what had just happened, Mihara, the mage, warned Nozomi that something was charging at her from behind, and the female knight was almost hit by the attack of two minotaurs. However, a magical shield circle appeared beneath her, saving her from a fatal blow. It was a spell cast by Muguru. After being saved and left unharmed, Nozomi finally realized Muguru's true power. The female knight then apologized for her earlier words, admitting she had misjudged them both just because of their class and rank. However, Kana wasn't really bothered by the apology, because to her being a hunter means constantly teetering between life and death. To Muguru, Nozomi's attempt to push them away also stemmed from her own kindness. Nozomi suddenly became shy upon hearing him mention her kindness. It had been many years since someone had praised her. The team was now more united. They decided to press on, always watching their backs and working together to find a way out of the dungeon. 2 hours later, thanks to Kana's support charms, the knight Nozomi had become much stronger and had defeated a horde of monsters. Nozomi watched the two siblings, beginning to wonder who they really were and what their relationship was like. The group had been fighting for a long time, and to everyone's surprise, they still hadn't reached the final boss room, which they found very strange. They began to suspect that this rejection dungeon operated on a very strange and complex mechanism. Nozomi, the female knight, pondered that perhaps this difficulty was because it was their first time facing an A-rank dungeon. However, the protagonist Muguru pointed to a mark he had carved on the wall, a method to keep them from getting lost. It was only then that everyone suddenly realized they had been going in circles, constantly passing through identical places. Muguru found it very strange, because he hadn't noticed any branching paths. He quickly understood the situation and decided to find a solution. Placing his hand on the wall, Muguru felt a slight vibration and discovered a secret passage. Astonished, Nozomi asked how he found that hidden passage, when no one else had noticed. Muguru explained that many high-level dungeons have this type of trap. It's a type of barrier that's impossible to pass without knowing how to solve the mystery. You can't reach the final boss if the puzzle hasn't been solved. His curious teammates asked how he knew so much, even though this was the first dungeon he'd ever entered. He replied that it was obvious because in his previous life he had endured countless hardships clearing similar dungeons. This experience helped him hone a sophisticated detection skill using his mana to sense which parts of the wall were hollow. But to the group he just brushed it off, saying he had read about it in a book a long time ago. Nozomi then declared that she would be on the front line, taking on the defensive role against the boss. As for Hikari, she would stay in the back to protect Kana, even though an A-rank boss would surely be stronger than what the group anticipated. But Muguru already had a plan in mind. The female knight asked if he was ready, and as soon as he nodded, they entered the dungeon ready for battle. Suddenly, they encountered a giant, enraged minotaur. The creature immediately launched an attack with its giant axe, but our hero dodged it just in the nick of time. Muguru realized the enemy was much stronger than he had imagined, and ordered Nozomi not to attack yet. However, Nozomi raised her shield and tried to block the Minotaur's blow, but the impact was too horrific. Her defense shattered, her shield was destroyed. She took the full force of the blow and was flung far back. The other girls were utterly horrified, because they had never seen an attack that Nozomi couldn't block with her shield. No matter how sturdy a knight's defense is, it can't compare to a dedicated tank role even for a powerful knight. But fighting an A-rank boss in close combat was an extremely dangerous situation. Our protagonist Muguru shouted an order for Sakura to evacuate Nozomi, because the female knight was seriously injured. He told his sister Kana to quickly heal the wounded girl while he would deal with the dungeon boss himself. Charging straight at the enraged armored bull monster as it furiously threw its weapon at him, Muguru dodged and realized those attacks could kill him instantly. The situation was dire. The girls were all in danger, and he knew he had to give it his all to survive this fight. However, if he could find even a fleeting opening, he would seize the chance without hesitation. The moment the boss raised its arm to strike, Muguru found the opening he needed. He chanted an ice spell, slamming his hand violently onto the ground. Sharp ice spikes shot up, attacking and damaging the Minotaur. Despite being injured, the Minotaur monster remained standing. The main character realized that while it possessed incredible power, its defense seemed to be a weak point. With an agile leap, Muguru dodged a brutal slam and seized the opportunity. You vault onto the Minotaur's weapon and dash past it. After a lightning-fast run-up, you leap up to the dungeon boss's head level. The Minotaur tries to counter, but in doing so, it accidentally leaves itself wide open. Muguru knows that as long as he has the instant death protection amulet, he'll be safe from a fatal blow. Affirming that this will be the decisive strike, he swings Saito's sword. He brings it down with a devastating overhead slash. The blow splits the Minotaur's entire body. Muguru feels a wave of relief wash over him, overjoyed at his narrow victory. However, he is shocked to realize the creature is still alive. Its eyes are now crimson red, burning with hatred. Our hero can hardly believe it. The Minotaur is still standing. The boss charges furiously toward him. Facing this high-speed, hate-fueled charge, Muguru feels he can't take another hit. The Minotaur monster slams its axe into the ground in a fit of rage. Watching this, Izumi is certain the creature has sustained very heavy damage. Muguru thinks to himself that he'll come out without a scratch if he can drag it into a war of attrition. The moment the monster unleashes an overwhelming blow, he immediately lowers his center of gravity to dodge. Seeing the monster's giant weapon before him, he wonders if he can pull off a chain of attacks. First, he realizes he can dodge the Minotaur's giant weapon attack. Then, seeing the weapon swing at close range, he thinks his life is over. After the Minotaur's deafening roar as it throws its flaming axe, the main character feels an overwhelming fear. However, Kana appears to save him, bravely rushing forward to shield him. In desperation, Muguru yells at her to get away, but then the hero realizes something crucial. He sees Kana take the hit, and immediately the anti-instant death charm activates, saving her life. In that moment of understanding Kana's tactic, Muguru grabs the holy sword and, not missing his chance, delivers the finishing blow. As expected of an A-rank dungeon, the group obtained 50 points. Muguru doesn't know the exact source of these bonus points, but he suspects it's related to the mission emblem and the mark he possesses. Witnessing his performance, his teammates all see him as someone abnormally strong. Muguru momentarily forgot about Kana, but he quickly realizes she's safe and sound. He asserts that he would have lost without her, and asks Kana to never do that again because he almost died of a heart attack. Kana immediately retorts that he's the one who's always putting himself in danger. Nozomi then presses him, asking if Muguru is really an unaffiliated D-rank hunter, because she finds it utterly absurd that he defeated an A-rank boss. The protagonist believes he will now become a C-rank hunter with the association, and explains that because of his low rank. It's very difficult for him to get quests. The moment the pink-haired girl takes his hand, Kana feels jealous. Nozomi invites both of them to join her guild, explaining that guilds are independent groups of hunters. As the guildmaster, she feels it's a shame that someone like Muguru doesn't belong to any organization. She argues that if they join, they'll rank up faster, earn more money, and her guild doesn't take a cut of the rewards. Muguru thanks her but declines the offer, explaining that it wouldn't be good for either side. The girl then says it's not a matter of benefits, but that she feels safer with him in the guild, expressing her desire for them to fight side by side. The protagonist finds her reaction a bit strange. He explains that no matter how tempting the offer is, being in a guild would limit the places he can go and the things he can do. Seeing his determination, the female guildmaster decides not to press him further. She says that they all would have likely died without him, so she wants to thank him and suggests the two of them have a private date tomorrow. Nozomi is overjoyed when Muguru accepts. In response to her question, the protagonist explains that Kana is just a regular member of his party. Since he can't say she's his reincarnated sister, he has to lie. Nozomi is even more thrilled with that answer, and is clearly flirting with him. Suddenly, another purple gate appears to everyone's surprise. After clearing the dungeon, they return home. Muguru announces he's going out. This annoys Kana, as it seems she has developed a crush on him, especially after he told her he cares a lot about her. Kana gets even more sulky about him going on a date with Nozomi. Then the protagonist goes to the subway station and meets the pink-haired girl. Meguru kept Nozomi waiting for nearly an hour, but she says she's only been there for 5 minutes. The two go to a restaurant for spaghetti and enjoy some romantic moments during dinner. Nozomi asks Meguru what he usually does on his days off. He replies that he just rests, storing up as much energy as possible until the next quest. She quickly understands that the protagonist doesn't have a girlfriend, and is overjoyed to hear Meguru say that he isn't really seeing anyone. She then tries to hide her excitement while Meguru doesn't understand why she's so flustered. In return, he asks what she usually does in her free time. She says she also uses her free time to rest properly. The protagonist is quite surprised because young people like her, usually like to go out. Nozomi explains that she wants to get stronger because she still remembers what he said about her being too arrogant. She shares that something like that had happened before, and she almost faced a tragedy in her life. Because of her overconfidence, she lost her best friend. She never wants to experience something so terrible, ever again in her life. That's why she always gives it her all. Meguru deeply empathizes with what she went through because he also wants to protect Kana and doesn't want to lose his sister again like he did in his past life. Speaking of Kana, Nozomi asks if they're just teammates or what their real relationship is. Meguru replies that they are teammates, living together under one roof. The pink-haired girl is stunned to discover they are living together, and when he mentions they even sleep in the same room, Nozomi is floored. He has completely ruined her mood. She becomes quiet and sad even after he gently tells her about his relationship with Kana, after she commented that it was strange they lived together. He then suggests stopping by a nearby shop. They stop in front of a very impressive weapon shop. Nozomi thinks the shop is amazing, with prices that are a steal for the quality of the weapons, while Meguru is pleased that he quickly managed to lift her spirits. With a thick Chinese accent, the shopkeeper asks if they need anything. At that time, foreigners his age were a rare sight in Japan, and the main character found this unusual. Nozomi picked up a sword and was very impressed with its quality. Meguru didn't know much about swords, but the girl still asked him to try holding the weapon. The main character gave the sword a test swing and judged it to be a fine weapon. The shop owner, with his distinct accent, asked Meguru what kind of weapon he usually used. In response, Izumi Meguro summoned his legendary sword, presenting it before the shop owner, who was visibly stunned when he saw the duty sigil on the blade. The man became enraged, convinced that Meguro worked for Masubara. His fury consumed him as he grabbed his own weapon, preparing to attack Izumi Meguro. Facing the owner's rage and his fine weapon, Meguro felt rather troubled. He drew his sword, trying to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. However, the owner paid him no mind and charged straight at Meguro. Meguro warned that he wouldn't hold back if the man insisted on attacking, then swiftly grabbed the man's arm. Displaying clearly overwhelming strength, Meguro slammed the shop owner to the ground. He tried not to hurt him, but he had no other choice but to restrain him. He then demanded to know what on earth was going on and why the owner had attacked him. Meguro figured it would be a huge hassle if Nozomi started prying into this. So he thanked her for a fun day and decided to end their outing right there. Taking the owner into the storage room, Meguro reaffirmed that he didn't work for Matsubara. If he did, the man would have been dead long ago. He therefore decided to ask the owner why he thought he worked for Matsubara. The man replied that the symbol on the sword was the black insignia. It appears on all of the former hero's weapons. He explained that this symbol carries a part of the dungeon master's power. Meguro then understood that Masubara had placed a curse on the sword he was using. Meguro said he'd obtained that sword after defeating one of Masubara's minions. This revelation shocked the owner, making him finally believe Meguro. Now that the questions were answered, Meguro pressed the man to spill what he knew about Masubara. The owner revealed that he had been investigating Matsubara for the past 5 years with the intent to kill him. The owner described Matsubara as a monster. He became a dungeon master hundreds of years ago. He can release monsters at any time. This way he creates hordes that flood the city. No one, not even the government, dares to oppose him. Meguro knew that dungeon masters were granted 4 special privileges by the government. Masubara used these powers to create new dungeons and maintain his eternal youth. Moreover, they can completely control their dungeons and become much stronger thanks to the blessing from an S-rank dungeon. Meguro declared that Masubara wouldn't be able to escape no matter what evil powers he used. The owner believed that Masubara saw human beings as nothing more than tools to satisfy his desires. He imposed countless taxes just to line his own pockets, pushing the people into poverty and to the brink of starvation. However, Any sign of discontent was met with incredibly cruel punishment from the former hero. The owner asked Izumi Meguro if he knew about the happy party. Meguro said no, but he had a feeling the name was the complete opposite of its true meaning. The owner confirmed that the name was indeed terrible, as it referred to a group of women forced to serve the tyrant. Although they were officially just there to entertain and massage him, everyone tacitly understood they also had to perform other lecherous requests. His own daughter was taken to become a member of the happy party. His wife was also taken when she tried to resist and was ultimately murdered. That was why the shop owner was so utterly enraged. He swore to end Masabara and came to Japan for that very purpose. The owner asserted that killing the former hero inside his own dungeon was impossible. However, knowing that Masabara frequently visited Japan and was currently in the country, the owner had come to find him personally. At this point, Meguro understood why the shop owner was so broken. The owner apologized for attacking him because he truly believed Meguro worked for that tyrant. Meguro accepted the apology but insisted that the owner would never be able to defeat that villain this way. His anger flaring up again, the owner lunged at Meguro, yelling that he didn't know a damn thing. Catching the man's punch, Meguro asserted that he truly sympathized with him, but he also warned him about the power gap between them and their enemy. Furthermore, it would be he, Meguro, who would end the former hero, not the shop owner. Just then, the owner proposed that Izumi Meguro join his group to fight alongside them. He believed they could help each other and become allies to fulfill their shared desire for revenge. Meguro immediately refused, prompting the owner to ask why. Meguro repeated that he would finish Masabara himself. Moreover, he had no interest in teaming up with anyone. He preferred to act as a lone wolf. Kana was the only person he trusted, and he would never put his faith in anyone else. The owner reasoned that their shared goal of killing Masabara was more than enough reason to form an alliance. He insisted that his group had very strong warriors, and Meguro would be in danger if he refused to join. But no matter what he said, Meguro wouldn't be easily swayed. Afterwards, Meguro left the shop just as he had discussed with Kana. The day before, Meguro had told Kana to stay home and promised to be back early, and his little sister obediently agreed. Kana affectionately called him her boy, and thought that Meguro was going to meet an acquaintance. She started to suspect it was that woman from before. She began to seethe with jealousy, wondering why he wouldn't just tell her the truth. Worried that he was hiding something, Kana decided to follow Meguro, convinced he was intentionally keeping things from her. While Kana was tailing Meguro, he almost sensed her presence. However, he quickly dismissed that feeling. Figuring he was just imagining things, he continued walking down the street. Meguro had come here to settle things with the Chinese man's group, as they had decided to have a match. In order to compete for the right to eliminate Matsubara, a group of men in military uniforms with cold, ruthless expressions were staring daggers at Meguro. The members had heard whispers about him. They'd heard he had no intention of joining and wanted to confirm it directly. Meguro stated clearly that he wanted nothing to do with their group, left with no other choice. The entire group began to attack him. A man in uniform threw a devastating punch, but Meguro easily caught it with his hand. He could feel that the attack was quite powerful, but it was full of hesitation, so he quickly landed a punch straight to the man's gut. Using the momentum of the attack, he slammed him to the ground, determined to thoroughly exploit his opponent's weakness. The Chinese leader thought to himself that no matter how strong he was, they absolutely could not let him leave this place. Meguro realized the entire group was incredibly inexperienced in actual combat. Seeing they had so little skill, he found the fight so easy it was laughable. He unleashed a flurry of combination attacks, taking them all down in the blink of an eye. He stressed that their desire to eliminate Matsubara was just a fantasy that would never become a reality. The men kept getting back up and stubbornly rushing Meguro, but they couldn't even touch him. The hero launched a thunderous punch into one of their ranks. He coldly asked if they weren't tired of this beating yet. Their leader declared that the fight was over, because they couldn't take any more punishment. The bald leader praised Izumi, admitting his skills were far too exceptional for his age, and congratulated him. As agreed, all the information they had gathered on Matsubara would now belong to him. They handed him a folder, and Kana, who was hiding behind a door, witnessed the entire event. She wondered what they were talking about, but then breathed a sigh of relief when she realized it wasn't a date with Nozomi. Just as Meguro stepped out of the warehouse, he was surprised to run into Kana. He demanded to know why she was there. A flustered Kana apologized for being nosy and following him. Meguro silently prayed she hadn't overheard the most crucial parts of the conversation. Kana then grabbed his hand and pressed him for answers. She asked what else he was hiding from her. She also asked why he was so desperate for revenge against the former hero Matsubara. Meguru knew that if he answered, he would have to explain the connection between them, and that could reawaken her own terrible memories from the past. He told her he couldn't say. Kana demanded to know why. She said he'd been acting very strange lately, and was hiding something from her. All of this was making her lose trust in Meguru, and she just wanted to be alone. She snatched her hand away, ran off, and told him to stay away from her. As for Matsubara, he was thinking about Meguro, the classless hunter who had rejected the organization and eliminated Seto. He was utterly furious with Meguro and considered his actions unforgivable. Therefore, he wanted to meet him in person as soon as possible. However, acting directly now would draw too much attention. In times like these, he needed to use his head, and then he noticed the presence of a girl on the street. He decided to use Akasaka Kana to lure Meguru into an advantageous situation. In any case, Matsubara also realized this girl looked remarkably like Meguru's sister. The former hero found Meguru's class baffling. After all, Meguru had nothing to his name, but he was highly intelligent and possessed a mysterious sense of justice. It didn't matter, though, because that wouldn't stop him. He would eliminate Izumi as quickly as possible, just as he had done to Akabeni Meguru and his sister hundreds of years ago. Meanwhile, Kana was reflecting on her actions. She thought she had been too harsh on Meguru. Even though she hated that he was keeping secrets from her, Akasaka Kana didn't want to keep fighting with him or continue this cold war between them. She tried to understand why he said he couldn't reveal his secret. As much as she wanted to know, she considered the possibility that Meguru had a very valid reason for hiding it from her. And since she was the one who had secretly followed him there, she felt she had no right to complain. First and foremost, she wanted to make up and keep a level head. She sent him a text message sincerely apologizing for her impulsive behavior. Right at that moment, a man stopped in his tracks and started a conversation with her in the middle of the square. Matsubara said he wasn't anyone suspicious and held up both his hands in a friendly gesture. Thanks to a sense of familiarity, Kana realized the man before her was one of the 6 legendary former heroes. However, a more vivid memory suddenly struck her moments later. He was the leader of the group that had once attacked him. Matsubara in turn asked if she was Meguru's companion. He claimed to be an acquaintance of his, one who held information about a past that even she didn't know about. Piquing her curiosity, he asked if Kana was interested in hearing these revelations. As he reached a hand out to her, Matsubara realized this girl wouldn't be easily fooled. Instead of yielding, Kana demanded to know what Izumi's secret was, and Matsubara asked in return if she really wanted to know. Despite sensing the danger radiating from the man, Kana felt an overwhelming desire to hear what he had to say, placing her faith in the protective charm she carried with her. With a sinister smile, the red-bearded man promised to tell her the whole truth, the thing that could save her life if things went wrong the moment the situation became dangerous. Kana immediately used her special item, but its effect was completely useless. Matsubara was entirely unharmed as he coldly threw a punch straight at her. Kana collapsed to the ground unconscious. Afterward, Matsubara declared that he would keep his promise to reveal all his secrets, but only after calling Izumi Meguro and settling the lingering grudge between them. In the end, the red-bearded man successfully kidnapped the reincarnated protagonist's little sister. Matsubara tied Kana up tightly and locked her in a strange place. It looked like a dungeon. The girl woke up furious at her situation. She yelled that no one would ever like someone like him and that she would never help him eliminate Meguro. Despite her repeatedly insisting that the boy in black was very strong, Kana was treated like a child by Matsubara. He mockingly called her sweetheart. He said he liked her stubbornness and that she should feel honored to have caught his eye. He even declared that after everything was over, she would become his wife. He then called it a fair trade as he brazenly took her phone. When Kana started to fight back, Matsubara punched the wall hard and ordered her to shut up. He told her to just keep her eyes wide open, promising that she would witness the tragic sight of Izumi being crushed by utter despair and fear. Meanwhile, our protagonist Meguro found it strange that Kana still wasn't home. He was expecting a call from her since he had accepted her apology. But as soon as he picked up the phone, he heard the voice of a man he didn't recognize. The person on the other end immediately revealed that he was holding the girl. He then declared that if Meguro wanted her back, he had to come to a specified address. Desperate, our protagonist began to shout, demanding to know if Kana was okay. Checking her location by scent, he declared that he didn't care who had done this, but the culprit would definitely pay a very heavy price. Our hero then swore he would go there and crush this person. Arriving at the address, Muguru observed chains stretched out to block his path. Then, he spotted Masubara standing next to a fire. The man commented on his quick arrival. It was at this moment that Muguru realized the voice he'd heard on the phone was familiar in a way. He felt even more gratified that Kana's kidnapper was Masubara, because either way, he was already eager to destroy the former hero. He pointed his sword straight at Masubara, but the man advised him not to be so hasty. Masubara explained that Kana was inside a spatial gate, and if Muguru left, the entire dungeon would disappear with him. Hearing this, our protagonist lowered his weapon in frustration. He followed Masubara into the dungeon created by the villain himself, a place completely devoid of monsters. Masubara revealed that if he wanted to erase the dungeon, not a single trace would be left, making it the perfect place to dispose of someone. Our protagonist concluded that Masubara wanted to eliminate him simply because he had gotten in his way. Muguru now understood that the double dungeon that had appeared in front of their house was also the work of this former hero. Clutching his sword tightly, Muguru asked if Kana was hurt. Masubara then invited him to see for himself. He threw open the massive doors, revealing the image of Kana tied to a cross. They saw each other, and our protagonist told his little sister to wait a moment, that he would save her immediately. The former hero raised his giant hammer and declared the battle had begun. Before that, our reincarnated hero had demanded the reason for this overwhelming hatred. After all, he was just a rank D hunter. Masubara replied that the reason was because Muguru reminded him of someone from his past, a man from hundreds of years ago, whom he found incredibly irritating. After hearing his enemy's reason, our hero revealed that the D-ranker Masubara hated was none other than himself. As soon as he finished speaking, Muguru swung his sword and charged straight at the red-bearded man, a surging energy emanating from his body. Masubara was stunned. He recognized this style and aura. It was exactly like the Muguru from hundreds of years ago. With no doubt left, he raised his giant weapon and faced Izumi. The two of them charged in to attack. Charged. Their weapons clashed, creating a fiery showdown. As our protagonist fell back, his enemy mocked him for being weak, saying he was nothing compared to his self from hundreds of years ago. There was a clear power gap between Izumi and Masubara at this point in time. Our protagonist realized he couldn't win without a plan, and he knew the former hero's weakness lay in his own body weight. Or to be more precise. Alright. The piece of armor on his left shoulder seemed to be a magic item. It amplified the energy in his body, making him much stronger for brief moments. This was the reason Matsubara could move so nimbly despite his massive frame. However, Izumi had superior speed. Therefore, he decided to break the armor on the man's shoulder. Despite being called weak by Matsubara, Izumi retorted that his opponent's defense was too lax. He then gripped his sword and charged forward. Displaying his incredible speed, he dashed past the giant and it launched an attack on his left shoulder, cracking his armor. Realizing Izumi's speed, Masubara tried to swing his hammer down, slamming his giant weapon into the ground with all his might. However, Izumi dodged it and launched a counterattack from the air. Standing above Masubara, he delivered a critical blow to the man's armor piece, damaging the magical item even more heavily. After that, Izumi decided to interrogate this tyrant before finishing him for good. Knowing Masubara was gathering forces in Japan, he pointed his sword straight at the enemy's neck and asked what their plan was, and demanded an answer. Masubara burst out laughing, finding it ridiculous that Izumi didn't know the reason, and explained that Japan is a special place thanks to the Sky Dungeon. That disappeared hundreds of years ago. Even after using a portion of that incredible power to grant a wish, the remaining energy was still immense. Masubara believed that this energy should have been Izumi's reward, but after a long time it crystallized and is now hidden somewhere in Japan. If he could obtain this crystal, Masubara would become much stronger than he is now. The man declared that he wasn't satisfied with controlling just China. He wanted the crystal to rise above the others, to overwhelm the other heroes at all costs, so that this entire world would belong to him. However, other heroes were also plotting something similar, and the moment the crystal is found, every single one of them will crawl out of their holes to fight for it. That was why Masubara was trying so hard to gather his forces. Izumi admitted that the enemy's motive was very true to his nature, but he considered this plan completely worthless and advised Masubara to give up on that pipe dream. Following that, Izumi launched a sword strike filled with hatred and inner energy, determined to destroy that beast with a direct slash to his neck. Masubara showed a flicker of fear. But then he grabbed the sword, stopping Izumi's attack, and revealed that the armor on his left shoulder wasn't his weak point. He threw a powerful punch into Izumi's stomach, sending him flying. As Izumi writhed in pain, Kana screamed in panic, afraid that Meguro Izumi would die. Masabara, the arrogant former hero, said that he had lived for a very long time, and used this armor to compensate for his heavy muscles, but now he no longer needed it to maintain his balance. Tossing aside the armor, he declared that Izumi's time was up. Seeing him remove his armor, Izumi knew this battle wouldn't be easy, however. Over the past few days, he had collected many items from poisons to talismans and intended to use them to protect himself. He still had countless secret moves that the enemy knew nothing about. Izumi then sneered that Masabara was talking a bit too much today, and he would make sure he shut his mouth for good. Knowing that in his current state, he had no chance in a direct confrontation, Izumi came up with another plan. He slammed his sword into the cliff wall, causing rocks to rain down on the villain, aiming to put him at a greater disadvantage. Immediately after, he flooded the ground to prepare for another spell. Izumi knew full well Masabara wouldn't dare unleash the power he was so proud of on this wet and unstable ground. After that, as someone with no class, Izumi could adapt to any situation, and began to charge forward despite the slippery ground. He approached the enemy with lightning speed and unleashed fire magic. Using an explosive flame, he hit Masabara and silently hoped the blow was enough to finish him. However, Masabara quickly recovered and declared that the battle hadn't even truly begun. He stepped out of the sea of flames, his clothes slightly singed but without a single scratch on his body. Izumi realized the only way to win was with a decisive blow, so he activated a talisman. He dodged a massive hammer swing, but Masabara sneered, calling him too naive. Izumi immediately nullified Masabara's attack with a magical barrier emanating from the talisman. Right after blocking the blow, he gripped his holy sword and unleashed a slash, causing Masabara to collapse. This was his last trump card, and Izumi breathed a sigh of relief as it had successfully struck down the enemy. But Masabara was still alive and kicking. He declared he didn't even feel any pain from those attacks. This caused Izumi to start worrying. The enemy Masabara scoffed that Meguro only knew how to use cheap, petty tricks, which were not nearly enough to defeat him. He said contemptuously that it was all a worthless, classless piece of trash like him could do. Masabara then glanced around, noticing the mess the young hero had just made in his dungeon. In that very moment, Masabara himself, the former hero who was now Meguro's enemy, cleaned up the dungeon with a simple magical wave of his hand. Meguro showed his astonishment. In response, the villain gave a smug smile, boasting that this was his dungeon and he had complete control over it. Without delay, Masabara summoned a horde of monsters and a powerful spell, mockingly asking if the hero would continue to be surprised by what was about to happen. Seeing the gorgons and demons charging towards him, Izumi immediately used fire magic to defend himself and began to incinerate the enemies with his flames. However, he was stunned when Masabara suddenly closed in from behind, swinging his giant weapon to attack him. The brutal blow sent our protagonist flying into the air. The difference in stats was so overwhelming that our hero seemed to have no hope of victory left. His mind reeled from the blow, feeling helpless against the greatest enemy of his life, unable to fight back. What happened hundreds of years ago seemed to be repeating itself in this very moment, plunging him into the depths of despair. A haunting vision, the memory of his own and his sister's deaths, returned to torment him. In that moment between life and death, a purple sigil appeared on his hand, awakening the emblem's power-devouring ability. He discovered he could only use the power of the emblem's mission for a mere 30 seconds, but at this point that no longer mattered. Without hesitation, Meguro Izumi accepted the system's offer, knowing that through it he would become incredibly powerful. As soon as he agreed, his attack and speed stats skyrocketed to over 500. The moment the demons rushed in to tear him apart, he quickly took a stance, unleashing a devastating slash that finished off countless monsters at once. Meguro felt an explosive power surging through his veins, and from that moment, the 5-minute countdown to use this power officially began. Astonished, Masabara questioned why Meguro possessed the emblem's sigil. He then revealed that after killing him in the Sky Dungeon, he and the others had all received power according to their desires. For example, Masabara gained overwhelming stats and countless unique skills. Deciding not to waste any more words, Masabara acted as if he couldn't care less about that little punk. Having grown stronger, he knew full well that the dungeon had recognized Meguro as if he had cleansed it, and in return had granted him this sigil. Though surprised, this didn't change his intention to destroy the young hero right then and there. With newfound confidence, our protagonist retorted, "Masubara, don't be so sure of your victory. I'm much stronger now." In response, his enemy stomped on the ground, using brute force to destroy the surrounding environment. At the same time, Masubara cast a fiery spell as bright as the sun, launching it straight at Maguru. Seeing the sun-like fire magic radiating intense heat, Maguru froze it from a distance. With the space frozen, he seized the opportunity, swinging his sword and severing his enemy's arm, causing it to fall motionless to the ground. Izumi felt his body become as light as a feather. The power flowing through him felt endless in this state. Finishing off this villain now would be a piece of cake. It was only then that red-haired Masubara understood true despair and began to beg for his life. However, that only made our protagonist more disgusted. After all, hundreds of years ago, Masubara didn't hesitate to take his life when he begged for mercy. Maguru's reaction would be exactly the same. He began to conjure a series of massive ice spikes. Despite the red-haired man being completely consumed by despair, our hero still launched the ice spear toward him. Simultaneously, a barrage of sharp spikes pierced through Masubara's body. And so the villain was finally finished, closing the first chapter of the Seven Karma Hunters' revenge. However, the victory was surprisingly anticlimactic as the battle ended more easily than Maguru had imagined. The emblem of power had been fully charged and his mission power was also depleted, causing his stats to return to normal. Now the mark on his hand had grown larger, and he realized the mission power was what he'd obtained after eliminating Sato. Maguru speculated that this mark must have some connection to taking the lives of others. However, he had something more important to do: rescue his sister Kana. Maguru frantically rushed to his sister's side. He broke her chains. The little girl burst into tears of joy and relief, throwing her arms around her brother. Kana, choking back sobs, expressed her joy at being alive and chirped apologies for causing him trouble. Our hero gently reassured her, saying she didn't need to worry because she was his reason for living. Those words left the girl completely stunned, realizing she couldn't fully grasp the deep meaning behind his words at that moment. Maguru quickly changed the subject, deciding they had to leave immediately. Just then he realized there was no exit, and the ground began to shake violently. The dungeon created by Masubara was collapsing now that its master was dead. The situation was critical as the exit was a great distance away. Maguru realized his mistake, fearing they would both be buried here, until an idea flashed in his mind. If this dungeon was created from Masubara's power, he could use his sword to activate the sigil on his body. Maguru decided to use the villain's own magic to survive and escape. After all, magic is the soul of all dungeons and spells. So he began to analyze the flow of this dungeon's magic. Observing the structure of this place and the amount of magic that formed it, Maguru understood that only a dungeon master could have absolute control. However, by holding Masubara's own sword, he was able to sever the link between the dungeon master and the surrounding space. In that instant, Maguru swung the sword and shattered the crystal connecting the magic to Masubara's soul. He carved a path forward. He and his sister Kana immediately rushed towards it as fast as they could. As soon as they got out, Maguru realized they had escaped death by a hair's breadth. His sister Kana was terrified when, just as he got outside, her brother collapsed to the ground. Maguru woke up in a hospital for the second time in this world. He noticed his magic was fading away just like before. Anna, his reincarnated sister, appeared and hugged him tightly, overjoyed to see he was awake. Then a nurse came in to check on our hero's health. The nurse explained that he had suddenly fainted with signs of a very high fever, but his health had now fully recovered. Maguru thanked the doctors and nurses for their dedicated care. After that, the doctor advised him to stay in the hospital for another night of observation, and they both agreed. He thought to himself that Kana must have had a very hard time getting him here, because he was not light at all. His sister said it was nothing, then started pressing him about what exactly had happened between him and Masubara that led to such a life-or-death battle. Maguru didn't want to tell the truth, but he felt he had no other choice. He explained that it was a long story and began to tell her about the hunters, who once challenged the dungeons in the sky. 8 S-rank hunters had challenged the celestial dungeon together. 6 of them had succeeded and become dungeon masters of S-rank dungeons around the world. Afterward, they used their immense power to conquer 6 corresponding territories. Kana knew Masubara was one of them, and she wondered what happened to the 2 heroes who couldn't return. The reincarnated girl had heard that the healer of the past, Kana, had been killed while protecting her comrades, but she didn't know much about the other hero, as very few records of him remained in the modern era. The hero explained that the person next to Kana had been betrayed by their comrades. He revealed that Masubara and the other heroes had murdered them both. The girl froze. Just as he was about to reveal that the last one was also named Maguru, he was interrupted by Nozomi's arrival. She was calling his name loudly. Overcome with worry, she had rushed to the hospital as fast as she could when she heard he had fainted, asking if he was okay. Our protagonist asked who told her, and the girl replied that the association had informed her. He then remembered that the hospital was obligated to report all hunter records to the association. He thanked her for rushing over to check on his health like that. Kana became jealous, watching the scene before her. Annoyed, she accused him of being foolishly smitten with the other girl. Maguru told her that he had to protect Kana. "And I can't die before I do that." Kana suddenly realized how much he truly cared for her. At the same time, the two girls shot daggers at each other like rivals fighting over a man. Our hero had no idea what was wrong with the two of them to suddenly hate each other like that. He felt he couldn't continue talking about his dark past right now, because this wasn't the right time. His quest for revenge had only just begun. For now, he would put that aside. He wanted to spend the days to come in the warmth of their affection. Afterwards, the two girls left. Leaving our hero alone in the hospital, everything suddenly became too quiet. He decided to turn on the TV to ease his boredom and happened to see Matsubara giving an interview on television. And he wondered how that could be possible when he had already killed the man. Inside a B-rank dungeon, Muguru began to face countless monsters. Flanked by Nozomi and Kana, they were helping him confront giant wolves. Nozomi, with her great sword in hand, took down several creatures to support our hero. He thought this was the perfect way to re-establish the natural balance. After conquering this dungeon, they received a lot of attribute points. Nozomi had been quite anxious since leaving the hospital, but it seemed she had been worrying too much. Our hero still wondered how Matsubara could have survived after being killed in the dungeon. He had used every trick he had the day before and knew that things wouldn't be so easy anymore. They decided to leave the B-rank dungeon where they were grinding for experience. As soon as they got out, they headed straight for the Shinjuku Hunters Association building. The secretary thanked them for their hard work and reported that the branch manager wanted to speak with Muguru. While they were talking over in China, Masubara was alive and kicking and absolutely fuming. He couldn't believe he'd been defeated. He looked at the mark on his body and thought to himself, "If I hadn't used that to separate my soul from my body, I'd probably be dead by now." Just then a man rushed into the room, stunned to see him still alive. Masubara was still seething over his recent defeat, but he decided to lower his guard for the time being as he had anticipated this situation, and he saw no major issue. He declared that it was nothing. Now he would go find some amusement and observe his subjects. However, his secretary advised that it would be best to be cautious and rest until the crystal regenerated. Despite the fact that his soul crystal had shattered, Masubara loudly snapped back that it wasn't a problem. Afterwards, Masubara went out into the city and observed the daily activities of the Chinese people. A very excited little girl tried to strike up a conversation with him while she was beaming with excitement. Her mother quickly reminded her daughter not to be disrespectful. With extreme brutality, Masubara kicked the child unconscious, causing the mother to scream in despair. Not long after, he found a bustling nightclub but felt no interest whatsoever. He muttered, "If Muguru hadn't come back to life, none of this troublesome stuff would have happened." Suddenly, something caught everyone's attention in the bar. It was the appearance of a heavy-set man who was unhesitatingly choking Masubara's secretary, and a young woman. That girl was the hero Futaba Mizuhara, who had found Masubara's real body. And the fat guy was the summoning hero Hidaka Asehi. The red-bearded Masubara immediately recognized both of them. Futaba said it had been 75 years since they last met and criticized the place's lax security. She claimed Masubara was looking down on them. In return, Masubara asked what they wanted and why they were trespassing on his territory. The hero revealed that the old man surely never imagined that 2 of the 6 heroes would become so powerful and that targeting the weakest among them was a completely logical move. Hidaka Asehi then summoned skeletons from a spatial gate, which immediately rushed to attack Matsubara. The bespectacled fat guy Hidaka taunted him, saying that Matsubara had grown exhausted and too complacent over the past 75 years while they had developed and grown much stronger. During that same period of time, he added that when the situation changes, progress is inevitable, and Matsubara just needed to change in the right way. Following Hidaka's taunts, the swarm of skeletons managed to restrain the old former hero. At the same time, Futaba Mizuhara approached him from behind, touched his head, and said goodbye. When Matsubara turned around, all he saw was a vortex of fire before she finished him off. Futaba was convinced she could have easily taken him down on her own. However, the portly summoner thought that if Matsubara hadn't been so exhausted, he could have actually turned the tables, if Futaba had gone alone. Futaba asked if that was all the fat hero needed. In response, Hidaka said that he already had everything he wanted as he began to absorb Matsubara's body. Hidaka declared that now was the time to save this rotten world, and the red-bearded Matsubara was turned into one of his summoned creatures. Meanwhile, elsewhere at a meeting with the Hunters Association manager, the reincarnated Muguru asked him what he wanted. The manager wanted to talk about Muguru and his relationship with Matsubara, but he also made it clear that he didn't suspect him at all. According to his investigation, the 6 heroes possessed the same type of mark which granted them special abilities. These abilities were diverse, but the only way the red-bearded Matsubara could have survived until now was thanks to it. When facing stronger opponents, he always escaped using the power of this mark. Muguru thought this made the explanation simpler, so he began to tell the manager everything. After listening, the manager concluded that Muguru was much stronger than he had thought, especially since he had managed to defeat Matsubara. He explained that the cruelty of the former heroes was extremely radical. Unfortunately, Japan had not yet been conquered. However, as long as they exist, the world could easily plunge into a nightmare. Therefore, the association manager wants to establish true peace throughout the world. He extended his hand towards Muguru and proposed that the two of them work together. In Japan's current situation, there was nothing to fear except for the occasional appearance of a few monsters. And this peace is said to be thanks to the power and influence of the 6 heroes. When asked what makes Japan more special than any other country, the chairman explains that it is a special country for the heroes because it is their homeland and the place where the Sky Dungeon first appeared 100 years ago. This dungeon was conquered by 8 people, among whom were the heroes. After the dungeon collapsed, its condensed magical power turned into the crystals they know today. These magic crystals were scattered all over Japan, and it seems the heroes are relentlessly searching for them. Muguru then recalls that Matsubara was in fact looking for one of these crystals. He wonders why if they covet them so much. They haven't collected them themselves over the past century. The chairman replies that the heroes' attribute as dungeon masters is what gets in their way. This is the most plausible theory. After all, they gained immortality, eternal bodies, and immense power, but on reflection, this also implies they must simultaneously endure restrictions. The wavelength of the magic power emitted by the heroes and from their dungeons are identical. They don't just rule the dungeons, they've become a part of them. Thinking of this, Muguru remembers what Matsubara once said. His soul had become one with that place. So if the dungeons they rule are destroyed, they will vanish along with them. This possibility seems very real to Muguru since the heroes are bound to the dungeons. They can't move freely if the area is unstable. All the evidence points to this conclusion, though this is still just speculation observing the situation through the former hero. Muguru knows more dungeons will appear and the association chairman has asked for his help. Naturally, he will be compensated and the chairman promises to give him whatever he desires, whether it's money, status, or top-secret information. Muguru then requests the exclusive right to be the first to enter any B rank or higher dungeons across the country. To gain the power he wants, he needs to clear as many of them as possible and collect the rewards. The association chairman immediately agrees, expressing high hopes for the results of this new partnership. The protagonist then requests that the chairman not reveal anything to Kana even if they work together. He feels that this time. It will be easier to protect his sister if she's nearby, since he can't do everything he wants if she's not always with him. Moreover, he needs to figure out how to protect her while fighting the remaining heroes. However, the chairman argues that the 2 of them alone are not enough to confront the 6 heroes. He suggests Meguro join up with other powerful hunters. Meguro had never considered that possibility. He reveals he already has someone in mind for his team, Nozomi. Nozomi is thrilled to be asked, but she gives him one condition: she wants Hikari and Sakura to join too. Shattering her expectations, Meguro makes it clear he only wants her and not the others. The reason is, he is certain the other 2 would die if they joined, because Nozomi is far stronger than they are, and they would just be a liability. The best he could hope for from them is for them to act as sacrifices to keep Kana safe, a prospect he refuses to accept. He doesn't want to invite anyone to his party knowing they would certainly die. In turn, Nozomi refuses his offer. saying that doing so would be a betrayal of her two comrades. Even though she desperately wants to help Meguro, she would never turn her back on her friends. Frustrated, she gets up and tells Hikari and Sakura that they're leaving. Just then, Sakura steps in and makes a proposal to Izumi Meguro. While they want to support Nozomi, they know they can't match her level. Despite that, they have been best friends and hunters in the same party for many years, so they can't be separated. And so, they ask for a chance to prove their usefulness, declaring that if they fail, they will leave Nozomi's party. Nozomi hears all of this and tells them they can't make that decision by themselves. The girls then stand up to Nozomi, and the protagonist, witnessing their resolve, accepts their offer. Seeing they are willing to go that far, he will give them this chance. They head to an abandoned warehouse where Meguro guarantees they won't be disturbed. There, he challenges them to attack him simultaneously on the condition that he won't take a single step back. If they can make him move, he'll let them join the team. The two agree, and Hikari charges in with all her might, readying a blow. However, as she gets close enough to strike, she hesitates, afraid of hurting him. Meguro notices her reluctance and asserts that they don't have to go easy on him just because he doesn't have a weapon. He tells them to actually try and defeat him. Hikari then lunges forward with all her might, swinging her weapon down while Sakura tries to land a sneak attack from behind at the same time. Meguro observes their excellent teamwork, a product of working together for a long time. They attack in unison again, unleashing ice magic and physical strikes with their weapons. Until in a flash, Meguro sends Hikari flying and casts a spell on a stunned Sakura. After soundly knocking down and defeating them, he asks if that's all they've got. However, the girls confront him with renewed vigor and quickly rise to continue their assault. He takes note of their unshakable resolve as they charge with all their strength to unleash another attack. Nevertheless, they are facing a colossal mountain, a barrier impossible to overcome on their own. He swiftly slams them to the ground once more, all while remaining completely still in his starting position. Defeated, they both conclude their weakness would only hinder the team. They apologize to Nozomi for being unable to keep up with her, and that as a result, they can't remain in the party. They knew they never stood a chance in this trial. It was really a way to say goodbye to Nozomi. She tearfully thanked them and invited them to eat cake together whenever they were free. She expressed her wish for them to become stronger, so that one day they could fight side by side again, even though their team might be disbanded for now. But the three of them would always be the closest of friends. Hugging each other, they cried emotionally. Meguro, the protagonist, knew they were very determined and realized they had endured for too long. They might not be strong enough now, but he firmly believed that one day they would be. Suddenly, our hero received a mysterious call. As soon as he picked up, he heard someone calling his name in desperation. The urgent message revealed that Hidaka and Futaba, two of the 6 heroes, were on their way to Japan. Upon hearing that 2 of the 6 heroes had arrived, he was completely stunned and consumed by a deep hatred. 100 years ago, inside the dungeon in the sky, after the death of the original main character and his sister, Masubara was furious. They had cleared the final dungeon, but their wish wasn't granted. Opening the system window, it explained about a crystal that needed to be collected. He learned that by collapsing dungeons, they could obtain the crystal. By collecting the fragments scattered throughout Japan, any wish would be granted once the crystal was obtained, and they would become dungeon masters. The first dungeon they set foot in would be under their control, and they would obtain eternal life. Furthermore, they would receive a seal, enhanced stats, and a unique skill. However, if they didn't take control of a dungeon within the next 72 hours, they would die. The fat one, Masubara, understood that only one of them would have their wish granted. Obtaining the final crystal meant that from that moment on, these heroes would become enemies of one another. The knight hero, Shirashi Hokuto, found this situation quite interesting, while the archer hero Tsurumi Yakumo realized there were other explanations. The fragments were magical energy. The dungeons were frozen and had been scattered across the country, detectable from a distance by their magical traces. The mage heroine Kawasaki Masato thought the system was providing too much information. As for Futaba, she realized she couldn't even take a picture of this information to remember it later. Masubara didn't want to read everything. He only understood that he had to be the only one to collect the crystal. He thought he could take his time searching for as long as he wanted, as long as he eliminated the others first. Without bothering to read the entire text, he left for China, thinking it would be the best choice due to its proximity to Japan. However, Tsurumi didn't think China's terrain was favorable and thought Matsubara was a fool for leaving without reading the whole text. After reading everything, the remaining ones understood that only one of them could become a god in the new world, and those who didn't become that entity would be eliminated. Judging by the description of the crystal fragments, they couldn't be collected overnight. Finally, the Knight Sarashi understood that they would have to confront each other until someone was eliminated. No matter where they set up their base, a battle was inevitable. Tsurumi knew the situation would only change if someone collected the fragments in a flash. Hidaka couldn't think of a way to collect many fragments at once until he had an idea, and for some reason he thought of Futaba. Then Hidaka teamed up with her, saying the two of them wouldn't have to fight until they were the only ones left. He pleaded with her to stop wasting time taking pictures, but she replied that it wasn't a waste. She explained that she had a great plan to collect the crystal fragments and needed time to execute it. She told him to go do everything himself, and he told her to be less unreasonable. She insisted she just wanted to take pictures and demanded he accept that condition. Then she cast a spell on Hidaka, forcing him to obey, only asking that she take her pictures quickly. Deep down, he knew that the price for Futaba's help was very high, but he was willing to accept it. He couldn't harm her, and furthermore, he had to obey her every command. The spell would be triggered if he dared to break their agreement. Back in the present, our protagonist was shaken. Upon learning of the arrival of these two heroes, he would get more details soon, but Hidaka and Futaba were now a higher priority target than Matsubara. The only thing that had changed was the order in which our protagonist would eliminate those heroes. Moreover, his boss had asked him to come to the association immediately because he had something to give him. Upon arriving at the Hunters Association branch, the trio followed the boss to a room. Entering the warehouse to receive their gift, the boss said that due to the power of those heroes, they needed high-quality weapons to fight them. He showed off all the weapons in the warehouse and said they could take whatever they wanted. Our protagonist picked up a greatsword with a blue blade, and the boss had anticipated this from him. This sword is worth about 20 million on the market and is the most expensive item they have here. Maguru said that this sword was very good, but it wouldn't be enough for him for long. So he thought it was better to just use Saito's weapon and asked if that was the best they could offer. The boss replied that for now it was, and they needed special materials to enhance these weapons. Soon enough, Maguru could possess better weapons provided he brought back the necessary materials. A large amount of magical energy was present in the dungeons, and the extracted stone could be very useful for forging weapons. Our protagonist was unaware of this use for the extraction stone. His boss said that with one A-rank stone, they could upgrade weapons for all three of them. Maguru thought he could manage it, but he wished Kana and Nozomi also had good weapons. In the end, he understood they just needed to get an extraction stone to reach the pinnacle of weaponry. Although, of course, it was very difficult for an A-rank dungeon to suddenly appear out of thin air. He didn't know when he'd get a chance to find an A-rank dungeon, but his boss revealed that dungeons of that level, it was recently discovered in the center of Tokyo. Hearing that a dungeon had appeared the day before, the main character asked if anything had sprung up in Siberia. No one knew the exact reason. But lately, the ley lines have been very active, and that seems to be the cause behind these phenomena. A while later on the bullet train, Nozomi told them she was tracking Futaba Mizuho. She discovered Futaba was deeply involved in something shady. She was forcing all citizens to follow and like her Instagram posts. Anyone who forgot to interact with her posts was punished. Men and women who were considered more attractive than her also suffered the same fate despite that. However, Futaba freely distributed profits from oil fields, which made her quite popular with the people, and she seemed very passionate about farming likes on social media. Meanwhile, Hidaka Asahi had recently been put in charge of political purges, even though he's the type of person who never discusses politics. At most, they just let things happen because he couldn't easily bother them anyway. As for the reincarnated Maguru, Kana believed that Matsubara was the only one who knew the truth. She asked if he knew these people, and the main character replied that it had been 100 years since he'd last seen them. When asked what kind of people they were, the main character could never bring himself to say the words. He decided to hide from his sister that she was the reincarnation of the Kana from the past, but explained to Nozomi that he was the reincarnation of the hero Maguru. Back then, a week before entering the Sky Dungeon, they met the 6 heroes to learn how to fight together. They both arrived at the meeting place and met the other 6 heroes who would fight alongside their team. Matsubara was very polite upon meeting the main character, and he returned the courtesy. Together, they entered an A-rank dungeon and encountered a few monsters. Matsubara praised Maguru's skills, stressing that the jobless class was actually very useful in real combat. As for Futaba, she noted that besides being handsome, he was also very strong, and thought about choosing him as a potential boyfriend. At that moment, she approached the main character to talk and asked if he already had a girlfriend. Wanting to avoid future trouble, the main character immediately replied that he already had someone completely ignoring her. Seeing this, Futaba became incredibly furious at being treated so coldly by him. Believing the woman he was dating was Kana, she wondered what was so special about that little brat. Soon, she began to look at Kana with eyes full of anger and bitter jealousy, admitting that the girl was both beautiful and stylish. The heroes were fighting together to conquer the A-rank dungeon. That is until Futaba intentionally pushed the healer Kana, causing her to fall to the ground. She then apologized, and the fat guy helped the girl up. However, right after that, he began to place his hands on sensitive areas of her body. Meguru saw this and stopped him. He angrily asked what the hell he was doing and glared fiercely at the fat, bespectacled guy. Seeing a fight was about to break out, Masabara then asked everyone to stay close and stop arguing. Dana told her brother to calm down because she was fine, and the main character promised he would never leave his sister's side. Meguru didn't want to go into detail, but said that the heroes always lived true to their nature. He felt he had no right to judge them, because after all, the path of revenge he was on was hardly a noble ideal itself. When the trio reached the center of the Tokyo A-rank dungeon, they realized 7 monsters had been completely wiped out. Guessing someone had been there before them, they noticed a wide-open door. As soon as Meguru opened it, he saw a giant scorpion with streams of lightning surrounding its body. He also noticed the presence of Futaba and Hidaka, wondering how they managed to get here. Futaba and Hidaka didn't recognize the main character, and he suddenly remembered that it was obvious since his appearance had changed after reincarnating. Moreover, they didn't even notice the presence of the 2 girls in his party. Meguru told the 2 girls to get out of there immediately, and they obediently listened. He didn't know why the 2 heroes were here, and his hand was already gripping the hilt of his sword. He considered launching a surprise attack on them, but forced himself to calm down, because it was still too soon and he needed to get closer. He walked towards them and asked what they were doing here. They both asked back if the kid was a hunter. After he replied that he wasn't a hunter yet, Futaba arrogantly said that they had already killed the giant scorpion boss. Meguru sarcastically said that they must be really strong to have defeated the final boss of an A-rank dungeon. Waiting for the perfect moment, he suddenly launched a fireball at them, without any warning. Hidaka quickly grabbed Futaba, pulling her out of the way to help her dodge the surprise attack that had nearly taken both their lives. Enraged, the main character swung his special sword and charged straight at them. In response, Hidaka summoned a few skeletons, but they were quickly destroyed by the reincarnator in an instant. The fat guy told Futaba to calm down, because the person in front of them was no pushover. Kana disobeyed her brother's warning and called out his name right in front of the 2 heroes. Instantly, the female hero recognized Akabane Kana from 100 years ago. Before she could understand what was happening, Hidaka realized they had just called him Meguru. Observing Muguru's movements, his use of sword and magic, along with the fact that he didn't hesitate to attack 2 strangers, Hidaka came to an important conclusion. Understanding the situation, he told Futaba they should leave, stating that they couldn't run wild and destroy Meguru under the current circumstances. However, Futaba replied that she didn't care and declared her top priority was to kill Kana. She insisted on killing her even if she had nothing to do with the Akabane Kana of the past, because her face and attitude pissed her off, reminding her of the old days. Furthermore, she was also going to kill the other woman, Nozomi, simply because she could. Hidaka realized that when she was this enraged, Futaba would ignore every word he said, and if she cast her command spell, he would be unable to defy her. Seeing Futaba's stubbornness, Hidaka, the fat guy with glasses, gave her 30 seconds to finish the fight. At the same time, he suggested it would be better if she finished sooner. He said she was strong enough to win in such a short amount of time, then asked if he was expecting too much from her. Futaba seemed annoyed, but still promised that she would take care of it quickly. Meanwhile, Nozomi was horrified to discover that the 2 enemies before them were members of the 6 legendary heroes. Meguru confirmed it. Model. At the same time, she declared she had no choice but to end things right here. Futaba charged with all her might, and our hero prepared to block the attack. He was sure he'd be her target, but the heroine cast a spell and aimed it straight at Kana. Meguru quickly stepped forward to shield her, taking the full force of the attack, and he realized he could barely block her hits. Muguru noticed Futaba was aiming for Kana, but Nozomi confidently asserted that she could handle it. Then Nozomi powered up for a lightning-fast attack and rushed the enemy with all her strength. Seeing the strike up close, Futaba had to admit that Nozomi was better than she thought. But immediately after she dodged the blow and launched a counterattack, an incredibly powerful spell, proclaiming that the other girl was on a completely different level. Futaba landed a direct hit on Nozomi and took her down. She even boasted that she was stronger and more beautiful because she belonged to the first generation of elite hunters. Just then, Futaba was about to focus on Kana and Muguru. But she was interrupted by her accomplice Hidaka, who announced that their 30 seconds were up, and they were leaving through a portal. Before leaving, Futaba warned that while she'd let them live today, she would definitely take Kana's life next time. Muguru felt utterly powerless. He was pained to see Nozomi unconscious and deeply frustrated, because he hadn't even managed to touch Futaba. Nozomi, still dazed, managed to ask who those two were and why they knew Kana, feeling that the whole situation was just too strange. Muguru knew he had no choice but to tell the whole truth. He said that he wasn't the only one who was reincarnated into another body. He also revealed that Kana had gone through the same thing. He explained that both he and she were exact copies of two heroes from the past, Muguru and Kana. That was why those two were able to call them by their real names. Muguru regretted not being able to provide proof as the photos from 100 years ago were lost, but he swore that he couldn't possibly mistake his own sister even in another person's body. Now Kana finally understood why. Muguru had said he cared for her so deeply. Muguru repeated that he loved her dearly because she was part of his precious family and because they had hurt Kana in the past. He would never forgive them, swearing to himself that he would kill every last one of them with his own hands. Nozomi and Kana were stunned into silence. When she got home, Kana was still lost in thought. She realized she was the reason Izumi Muguru was caught up in a feud with the 6 heroes and wanted to destroy them. As for Muguru, he thought this shock was too much for Kana. Just then there was a knock on their door late at night. Muguru went to get it, telling his sister to go to bed first, and she obediently listened. Opening the door, Muguru saw Nozomi. She had come all the way to their house to talk to Kana. Nozomi said she wanted to borrow Kana for a bit. Then the two of them left the house for a walk. Seeing that it was raining and late, Muguru thought they could have just stayed inside. Nozomi asked Kana if it bothered her that Muguru cared for her like a little sister. Kana replied that it didn't bother her anymore now that she understood the whole story. To her, as long as they could be together, their relationship didn't matter. What really troubled her was her guilt and Muguru's obsession with revenge. It worried her deeply. She believed that if he wasn't so blinded by hatred, they could have lived a more peaceful life. Moreover, she felt that she had ruined any chance for him to have a quiet life, and she was sure that her past self would never have wanted him to seek revenge either. Nozomi expressed that she understood how Izumi Muguru felt because if anyone in her party or any of her friends were struck down, and she couldn't do anything to protect them, she would feel absolutely terrible. She thought she would also lose her mind in a rage, tear her enemies to pieces, and become obsessed no matter what anyone else said. Kana then thought about how she would feel if Muguru died, and whether she would react the same way. After agreeing with Nozomi, Kana concluded that Izumi's mind was completely focused on her, and even having her join the party was just to ensure her safety. Kana believed that she wanted Nozomi to sacrifice herself for her when the time came, because if she fought alone, she wouldn't be able to use her full power and would risk dying. After thinking it over, Kana realized that was okay. She wanted to accept this possibility, because she understood the pain of losing someone you love. However, Kana still wanted to be useful to Izumi Muguru in any way possible. Furthermore, she was certain he would defeat the heroes and asserted that Muguru needed her buffs and healing to fight effectively. This was a logical premise for any hunter party. Doing whatever it takes to protect the healer is always the most basic rule, so Kana decided not to worry about Muguru protecting her anymore. She saw it as mutual support, and she felt happy that she could help him. The next day, Kana and Nozomi were discussing an emergency dungeon that was waiting for Muguru. Nozomi said they should leave immediately. Then she asked Kana what she wanted. Kana still wanted to convince him to give up on revenge, but she knew he wouldn't change his mind. Faced with this, she pretended everything was fine and expressed her desire to join them on the mission. When they arrived, they found a portal right in the middle of the street. It was a terribly inconvenient location because people couldn't get into the shop that was behind it. For this reason, the guildmaster had requested that the dungeon be cleared within the day. Muguru, our hero, wanted to handle it quickly and get the extraction stone the branch manager had mentioned. So they entered the dungeon, and the inside looked pretty normal. They even thought it was easier than usual dungeons when they found the boss room's door, very quickly without any trouble along the way. Muguru realized that the dungeon's structure was overly simplistic. Just as Nozomi stepped forward, Muguru detected a trap and shouted a warning to her. However, she had already stepped on it. But thanks to her magic armor, the trap couldn't injure her. Muguru realized that only needles had been shot out, which he found rather disappointing. Using his detection skill, Muguru realized those needles were invisible to the naked eye. They shot out from the walls when someone passed certain points. When he saw the giant needles, Nozomi remarked that no one would notice them on their first visit here. Muguru explained that A-rank dungeons always have tricks, and this place was no exception. Suddenly, 2 pumpkin-shaped monsters appeared. Muguru created and launched ice spikes, destroying the swarm with ease. Nozomi realized they would have to deal with both monsters and traps at the same time. Muguru asserted that these weak enemies were no threat, no matter how many there were, as long as they didn't use any tricks. After that, he cast a powerful fire spell, unleashing it on the monsters and taking out many at once. He asked Nozomi to attract the attention of as many monsters as possible, while Kana focused on healing their comrade. Nozomi, the pink-haired girl, gripped her sword and declared that she would protect Muguru's little sister. She charged into the horde of monsters with all her might. Meanwhile, Kana, the blonde girl, continuously cast healing spells. Nozomi did an excellent job of drawing the monsters aggro, and Kana noticed that although the healing spell took time, it was very easy to cast in this situation. Muguru began to channel lightning magic into his arm, then approached one of the pumpkins. He placed his hand on it and discharged the electricity. He thanked the 2 girls for buying him time to cast the spell, and so they won with ease. Nozomi realized that when Muguru focused on attacking, the battle ended extremely quickly. She looked at the pumpkins that had been scorched and destroyed by Muguru's lightning magic and said she wanted to make his battles easier. However, she didn't have enough defense to be his vanguard and asked how to deal with stronger opponents. Muguru knew he couldn't raise Nozomi's defense overnight, as it was limited by her class. He considered a solution to increase her agility. After all, it wouldn't matter how strong an enemy's attack was if it couldn't hit her. Muguru said he had a spell that could increase movement speed, and based on the current situation, he decided to teach Kana a new skill. 1 hour after the training session, they entered the boss room. The boss was a giant raging pumpkin, and they would practice what they had just learned on it. Nozomi, who had just learned how to increase her movement speed and attack, rushed forward at an incredible speed. Meanwhile, Kana had learned a poison-type magic that drained the target's life force. Nozomi used her shield to block the boss's attack. This made her incredibly excited. While she bought time as the vanguard, Muguru handled the rest of the fight. He launched a giant ice spike, finishing off the boss, and praised Nozomi for her support. After defeating the final monster, they finally obtained the extraction stone. The scene changes to Futaba and Hidaka. They appear at an amusement park in Chiba Prefecture. Hidaka apologized for ruining Futaba's fun day, but explained that the day to execute their plan was drawing near. Futaba knew that Hidaka had planned everything himself, so she wanted to review the details. In response, he explained the complexity of the plan, which involved crystals hidden all over Japan. It would require a sweep of the entire country. However, he revealed that the recently acquired extraction stone could be the key to collecting all the crystals at once. Hidaka warned that the problem was that this action would draw attention to them, and the collection process would take a considerable amount of time. He feared that the intervention of any powerful hunters in the country could disrupt the plan, leading to failure. Futaba immediately understood he was referring to Meguro Izumi. Just then, Hidaka revealed his strategy to fake the hunter's death. With the unpredictability of what was to come, they both needed to be ready to fight at any moment. She reacted with a silly expression, while Hidaka seriously reiterated that he was counting on her for the plan to succeed. Meanwhile, at the Hunters Association warehouse, the branch manager was taking out the most expensive sword they owned. Meguro understood that the stronger the base weapon, the greater the power it would receive. He knew that using that sword, along with its bonus stats, would be more beneficial than any other weapon he currently had. The branch manager also noticed the 2 girls, Nozomi and Kana, had already chosen their own weapons. Next, they moved following the branch manager down to the association's second basement, which he explained was the Red Laboratory. Here they had developed the monster-generating equipment for the promotion tests. Then a scientist used the extremely powerful blue sword and the extraction stone to enhance it. When the process was finished, Maguru noticed the weapon's appearance hadn't changed at all. However, he decided to test swing it, promising to hold back since they were in an enclosed space. He swung down lightly and the sword unleashed an incredibly powerful slash of magical energy. This startled the whole group but greatly excited the branch manager. Maguru realized the sword had become much stronger and that technology had advanced tremendously over the centuries. He understood that the magic utilizing the extraction stone's energy contained a new innovation from 5 years ago, meaning the heroes still didn't know about this development. Maguru thought the only way to increase his stats was to clear all the dungeons at once. To do that, he needed enough firepower to fight against those two so-called heroes. Luckily, thanks to Nozomi's new shield, she could withstand damage more effectively, and Kana with her new staff could significantly reduce her casting time. The branch manager expressed his desire to do more for our hero, but Maguru said this was more than enough. Now he wanted to test the sword's power as soon as possible, and the manager, who was on a phone call, immediately offered to prepare a B-rank monster for him. He said he would call back later. The manager asked Maguru, the reincarnator, to remain calm as he heard some rather shocking news. He revealed that monsters had begun pouring out of the dungeon of Masubara in Shanghai. Instantly, Maguru understood that Masubara had been defeated. That was why monsters were escaping his dungeon, although he desperately wanted to find out what had happened. The current priority was to eliminate the monsters. If the situation was left as it was, the monster horde would also flood all of Japan, which meant Maguru had to conquer the S-rank dungeon as quickly as possible. The cause was secondary. The biggest problem was the overflowing horde of monsters. In that area, Maguru was ready to take down an S-rank dungeon on the spot, because once a dungeon master is defeated, the risk of the dungeon collapsing is very high. The guildmaster desperately wanted to borrow Maguru's power, but he had no intention of forcing him, however. He didn't even have to, as our protagonist declared he would go there to resolve the situation. After all, if they didn't go, no one else could handle it. It was an extremely serious problem, and if left unchecked, Japan would suffer the consequences, putting Kana's safety in jeopardy. They took a private jet, and 3 hours later, they were in the skies above Shanghai. They were preparing to land when they noticed the runway had been destroyed, making a landing impossible. The protagonist unbuckled his seatbelt and said that this position was fine. This made the others think he was going to parachute down, but instead he jumped straight out without a parachute with Kana in his arms, and Nozomi jumped out right after him. They activated anti-gravity magic and landed gently without any hard impact. Nozomi thought she was going to die, and Maguru apologized to her, explaining that he hadn't had time to detail his plan. He realized that the local hunters were quite weak, and were struggling against the hordes of beasts. No matter how numerous they were at a disadvantage because the monsters from an S-rank dungeon were incredibly powerful. For the time being, he would clear them all out himself. Chanting multiple spells at once, a rain of ice began to fall, its sharp spikes piercing through the swarm of monsters and destroying them. The monsters began to vanish, just like how dungeons disappear after being conquered. More importantly, Maguru asked if the local hunters understood the current situation. For some unknown reason, the hunters still believed that Matsubara was intentionally releasing the monsters, recalling that this had happened 25 years ago when a nationwide uprising was suppressed. Our protagonist knew that the red-haired hero of the past was committing a cruel act. Despite this, panic was still spreading among the populace, stemming from misinformation. However, Maguru made it clear that the current situation was completely different because Matsubara had been eliminated. The hunters couldn't believe it. Upon hearing he was defeated, they pressed Izumi for answers. She explained that there were actually 2 sources of magic, one from his body and another from the dungeon, and she could only sense one of them. This indicated the dungeon master had vanished. The place was collapsing, and as a result, monsters were pouring out. They still refused to believe it until they saw the truth with their own eyes. Just then, Matsubara appeared and tried to ambush Maguru. At the last second, our hero managed to draw his sword and block a massive hammer swing from the red-haired man Matsubara. He clearly declared that the truth was he was alive and well right before their eyes. Seeing him attack, the girls were stunned that he was still alive. They recalled that the monsters had scattered because the dungeon master had vanished. But that was absurd since Matsubara was still alive. Without hesitation, Maguru declared he would deal with him first and figure out why things had become like this later. Immediately, Matsubara lunged forward, swinging his giant hammer, but our hero nimbly dodged it. Maguru taunted him, remarking that his swings seemed less accurate than before. The red-haired man loudly denied it. For his part, Maguru knew he had just fought him recently, so there was no way he would forget his movement patterns. His own stats had definitely improved since that day, and his weapon was much stronger too. While Maguru was lost in thought, his enemy charged forward with the hammer again. To speed up the fight's tempo, Maguru used his enhanced sword to defend, astonishing his opponent. Izumi, although not fully understanding the situation, spoke up, saying that Matsubara seemed weaker than in their previous encounter. Maguru then declared he would end the fight with his next blow and began to channel red magic in his hand. His enemy said he had no choice but to use his ultimate move. Maguru, thinking he was just spouting nonsense to stall for time, retorted that it wouldn't work. He immediately unleashed his incredibly powerful fire magic, creating a massive explosion that engulfed Matsubara. At that very moment, two identical clones of him suddenly appeared before his eyes. Nozomi felt it was strange that there were 3 Matsubaras in one place. Kana, on the other hand, worried that she wouldn't be able to tell which one was the original. Our hero tried to deduce when the enemy had acquired this ability. Soon the two clones began copying the skills Maguru was using. One charged forward with powerful sword strikes, while the other began to channel fire magic. However, Maguru noticed that although the techniques were identical, the damage from their attacks seemed weaker than before. Dealing with multiple enemies at once was truly a headache for him. Suddenly, a fiery attack shot towards him, and he realized he wouldn't be able to dodge in time. So he countered with a similar magic attack, but with much greater intensity. To wipe out the enemy, he quickly regained his balance and reassured his group that he was completely fine without a scratch. But at the same time, the clones were also still alive and unharmed. In that moment, Maguru realized that the marks on the clones' hands looked different. The patterns of the sigils on the clones had changed. All these inconsistencies led him to the conclusion that the Matsubara before him was a fake, and suddenly everything became clear. He remembered that Hidaka Asahi possessed the ability to summon monsters at will. Hidaka had summoned mimic monsters in human form, therefore after eliminating the real Matsubara, Hidaka had created a clone of him. The image of power, which allows for the copying of appearance and skills, was what was visible on the clone's hands. However, Maguru knew that Hidaka couldn't copy a person's current stats. At that moment, Maguru bit his fingertip, letting his warm blood flow onto the power sigil. A heavy energy began to radiate from him, and he signaled for the two girls to follow him. The power of the clones model. Proportional to the amount of mana Hidaka poured into them when they split in two, they became weaker because their stats were halved. This was the very opening Maguru needed. To seize control of the battle, he yelled for Nozomi to act, and she immediately charged straight at the clones. With her sword, she unleashed a powerful spinning slash. In response, one clone cast an ice spell, while the other swung its sword and rushed forward to take the full force of the blow. Nozomi used her shield to defend, but realized she was in a bind. Watching from a distance, Kana began preparing a poison spell. As soon as the potent poison took hold of one of the two clones, it began to weaken. Seizing that opportunity, Maguru immediately stabbed the other clone from behind with his sword after disarming it. He sneered that if this were the real Matsubara, he would have predicted the move and counterattacked in time. Then he thrust his weapon through the clone's heart, officially finishing one of them off. Our hero said that he was only able to do it thanks to the two girls, and voiced his thanks to them right then. Izumi launched a fire spell toward the clone, causing it to be destroyed and vanish instantly. He felt incredibly satisfied for having resolved the situation, but that joy soon gave way to a feeling of unease. As the feeling lingered, Izumi tried to understand why Hidaka would create those clones in the first place. Finally, he decided it was time to stop overthinking it. Together with Kana and Nozomi, they headed toward the S-rank dungeon. Neither Kana nor Nozomi had ever set foot in a dungeon of that level before, nor had they ever seen so many different types of monsters gathered in one place. However, Izumi quickly proved that those creatures were no major threat. He took them down with incredible ease, even though the two girls initially thought that only he possessed such overwhelming power. But they soon realized they could also catch up and handle the monsters themselves. The creatures here were just as strong and resilient as the ones they had fought outside. But thanks to their new weapons, which could bring out the user's maximum potential, the party was able to overpower them. The very fact that they were fighting side by side here was proof of how much stronger they had become, and a sense of fulfillment washed over Kana and Nozomi. Despite that, Kana felt like she was lagging behind a bit. But Izumi immediately reassured her, saying her level had also risen considerably and she was just as strong as everyone else. Finally, the party opened the door to the boss's room, coming face to face with a massive demon clad in heavy armor. Without a moment's hesitation, Nozomi charged forward, instantly launching herself into the air and bringing down a powerful sword strike. However, the demon countered fiercely, forcing her to halt her attack and retreat to evade. Nozomi realized she had drawn the creature's attention, the one that resembled a giant gargoyle, and Izumi immediately seized the opening to cast an ice spell to support his comrade. But to everyone's astonishment, the creature didn't even flinch as the icy spikes struck it. Izumi then used the attack as a feint and began charging straight for the gargoyle. He used the blind spot behind the monster to cast a powerful spell. A brutal blast of purple energy sent the creature flying, annihilating it instantly and ending the battle. Breathing a sigh of relief, the three of them celebrated their victory. But Izumi quickly warned that the real challenge was just beginning. They stumbled upon another transfer gate, and Izumi reminded the two girls to stay on their guard. Kana and Nozomi had thought the demon they just defeated was the final boss, but the amount of mana radiating from the dungeon made it clear this couldn't be the last room. After all, this was an S-rank dungeon, and there were surely many more rooms to explore. Stepping through the new transfer gate, they arrived in another room with a spiral staircase leading upward. Passing through a door, they received a warning that once they went forward, they wouldn't be able to return until everything was cleared. Aware of this, the party resolved to press onward, climbing the spiral staircase until they reached another door on the second floor, which was illuminated by torches that gave off an eerie purple light. The room appeared to be empty of monsters, and Izumi casually walked into the center. The moment he stepped forward, gargoyles appeared out of nowhere and began circling them. Izumi noted that if they just fought the same way they had been dealing with these new monsters, wouldn't be difficult at all. The battle began, and the whole party understood that as long as they stood shoulder to shoulder, they could overcome any challenge. Nozomi charged ahead with her weapon, landing a precise slash on one monster and parrying its attacks. Once she had drawn their attention, Izumi unleashed his brutal purple magic, gradually thinning the ranks of the gargoyles, destroying them one by one. Izumi, being a reincarnator, noticed the monsters had grown more cautious of him after his last attack. He realized he wasn't alone. While the horde of gargoyles was busy with him, Nozomi had circled around to attack from behind, taking blows from both the front and the rear. The monsters began to falter. Even though their individual stats weren't low, their lack of coordination was glaringly obvious. Izumi wondered if this was the limit of Masubara, the one who created this dungeon, or simply his personal preference. However, it no longer mattered, because to them these creatures were no longer a real threat. Izumi then cast his Ice Rain spell, finishing them off. Taking out several gargoyles at once, Kana, thoroughly impressed, said that from now on, they should always fight like that. Izumi agreed, stressing that as long as they didn't let their guard down, remained vigilant, and always landed their hits accurately, there would be no problem. And so the party continued their journey, conquering the dungeon floor by floor. On the third floor, they came across a ferocious werewolf. On the fourth floor was a giant ogre. They overcame each challenge until they entered the fifth floor, the final stage in Masubara's S-rank dungeon. There, a horrifying sight awaited them. A colossal and terrifying dragon, reminiscent of the final boss from the Sky Dungeon. Izumi warns the two girls that this will be a much tougher opponent, but after everything they've overcome, he firmly states that there is no enemy they can't defeat by fighting side by side. He then prepares for battle, gripping his sword and confronting the dragon head-on. From the moment they stepped into that room, turning back was no longer an option. Even if the enemy was incredibly powerful, they had no choice but to take it down, sticking to their established strategy. Nozomi charged forward, drawing the dragon's attention. In that very instant, the monster prepared to unleash a lightning-fast tail whip at her. The agile girl saw the attack coming and nimbly dodged it with a flip. Then she launched herself into the air, soaring to the monster's level. At her current skill, she could still predict the dragon's movements. But then a fireball suddenly came hurtling towards her. It left Nozomi frozen in fear. Feeling like she couldn't possibly dodge the attack before her, Nozomi squeezed her eyes shut. In that hair-raising moment, Muguru grabbed her and pulled her away from the fatal blow. Enraged, the dragon began to spew a series of scorching streams of fire, but Kana, with her magic, quickly created shields to protect the group. These shields not only protected Muguru and Nozomi, the primary targets, but also covered the entire party. Izumi noticed that Nozomi had gotten dangerously close to the dragon, a clear testament to her growth and strength. However, Nozomi still felt guilty, because in that critical moment she had failed to act. Meanwhile, Muguru, our protagonist, saw the monster begin to gather a purple orb of energy in its mouth. A chill ran down his spine. Having no other choice but to use a smokescreen to buy time, he quickly cast a spell that enveloped the dragon in a thick fog, disorienting it and obscuring its vision. He then used his detection skill to observe his surroundings, even through the dense smoke. Kana, his little sister, was terrified because she couldn't see anything. So Muguru held her to reassure her, as he could see everything perfectly. In that short time, the dragon proved to be much smarter than it looked. After assessing the combat abilities of all three and focusing on Kana, their old strategy would no longer work. Therefore, Muguru decided Nozomi would switch positions while Kana, the pink-haired girl and the team's healer, needed to protect herself and maintain a defensive stance. Placing a hand on his sister's shoulder, he assured her that she was more than capable of handling this task, because he knew that in her current state, Kana was strong enough to protect herself. As long as Kana believed in herself, he could go all out in this fight. Filled with determination, the pink-haired girl clutched her shield and asserted to the hero that she would protect herself. From that moment on, the battle would become a one-on-one confrontation. Muguru swung his sword facing the dragon. It wasted no time, immediately casting a fire spell and unleashing a scorching breath. Izumi Muguru ran quickly to dodge the attack, and as he did, he thought of Nozomi, who had recently become incredibly strong. He had always felt uneasy having to protect Kana alone, but now he could entrust that duty to Nozomi. This put him at ease, allowing him to focus all his strength on the final boss, and gave him a better chance of winning. The dragon took flight, launching a series of attacks and stalactites, but our hero deflected them all with his sword. At this point, the only thing Muguru could do was launch a spell that struck the dragon square in the back. However, the monster was unfazed, proving its immense durability. Normal attacks weren't dealing much damage, but Muguru knew that no matter how tough the monster was, it definitely had a weak point. Observing the creature's joints, he noticed they were very flexible and soft. All he had to do was focus his attacks there. Muguru charged in, aiming to strike the joints, but the ferocious monster wouldn't let him get close. The moment the dragon attacked, he seized the opportunity to slide under its belly and unleash a strike. That very sword blow hit the weak spot, leaving a deep gash on the dragon's leg joint. The monster roared in pain. Blood began to pour from the wound. To take down such a colossal monster with just a single attack was truly impressive. Our hero gripped his sword menacingly, clearly declaring that he would end this fight. Immediately, the dragon dove low to the ground to attack him, and Muguru sensed something was wrong. The creature began to transform, changing color, while the magical energy it wielded also changed. This was a phenomenon that occurred when it took a certain amount of damage. The monster would transform and enhance all of its stats. Just as this happened, the dragon turned white and fired an incredibly powerful blue energy beam toward our hero. Muguru swung his sword, mustering an immense amount of strength to block that brutal energy stream. He managed to block the attack, but quickly realized he couldn't completely deflect its power. In that instant, the dragon's power overwhelmed him, sending our hero flying. Kana ran over worriedly, intending to heal him, but he shouted at her not to come any closer, because if she became the dragon's target, he wouldn't be able to protect her. He knew he had to deal with this monster alone. Kana was incredibly sad and frustrated because he was always like this, always trying to be the hero all by himself. Muguru took out a full recovery potion. If he managed to survive this situation, he told himself he would trust his sister more. He would have preferred her healing. But if the dragon knew they had healing magic, things would get very complicated. His solution was to act swiftly and destroy the dragon. This meant he had to leap up to the monster's level right as it began to gather its old spell again. Having already witnessed the power of its breath, our hero cast a spell downward to propel himself even higher after dodging the attack. He drew his sword and aimed straight for the dragon's wings, charging forward with all his strength. He then unleashed an incredibly precise and sharp slash, severing them completely. The strike was incredibly effective, causing the dragon to roar in agony as it crashed heavily to the ground. Immediately after, Muguru didn't have a single second to rest as he was preparing for his next blow. The dragon whipped its tail violently towards him, cutting off the reincarnator's attack. He was forced to dodge the treacherous tail whip. After he dodged the attack, the monster, despite its massive size, proved to be incredibly agile. It lunged forward in a flash, pouncing on Izumi with its sharp claws. Caught by surprise, Maguru couldn't react in time. The blow hit its mark, sending him flying and slamming him hard against the cliff face. The impact caused an excruciating pain while the girls showed clear worry and wanted to rush to his aid, but our hero understood that his legs, a minor disadvantage, can be overcome with equipment and skills, but this time he had to admit the power gap between him and the monster was simply too vast to be bridged. Facing this ultimate disadvantage, he quickly drank a full recovery potion. Maguru calculated that if he destroyed that cliff wall, he could open an escape route. His plan was to act as a decoy so the two girls could escape, as he saw no other way. With that resolve, he shouted for them to listen carefully, declaring he would shatter the wall. But before he could finish explaining his plan, the white dragon charged in to attack again. The monster's tail whip shattered the magic the main character was gathering, crushing his plan. As the dragon prepared to strike with its tail once more, Maguru quickly created a magic shield to defend himself. He remembered that this very amulet had prevented instant fatal blows. Looking at the monster's enormous size, he couldn't find a single opening to strike. Suddenly, the purple sigil appeared on his hand again, just like before. The system then asked if he wanted to activate the sigil of responsibility to attain ultimate power. Maguru knew if he accepted, he would gain limitless power and defeat the monster. However, he also understood that if he couldn't eliminate the target within 300 seconds, he would die. Seeing the dragon roaring fiercely, Maguru felt the immense pressure, unsure of what to do. Without a moment's hesitation, his answer was no. He knew that even if he sacrificed himself to take down the dragon, it wouldn't guarantee Kana's safety forever. So he decided to let the girls escape first, and then retreat with them. Even if it meant being a decoy, Maguru had no intention of dying here. He began to cast a new spell, freezing several weak points on the dragon, including its giant claws. Just as he regained his confidence and was certain he would win, the monster shattered the ice. At that moment, another sigil with radiant wings appeared on his hand. This was the sigil of hope, which could only be maintained for 30 seconds. Maguru realized it carried no risk, and was completely different from the sigil of responsibility, so he decided to use it. His stats skyrocketed by 500 points, and he could feel power surging through his veins. He knew 30 seconds was short, but he believed it was enough. He charged straight at the dragon as it was trying to swing its murderous claws. He immediately dodged out of the way, because he could see through every attack. With no time to waste, Maguru noticed the dragon gathering its poison breath. Though he knew it was risky, he decided to close the distance. He leaped and cast a downward spell to propel himself high into the air, closing in on the enemy. He was certain this would be the decisive blow. He launched an ice spear with maximum power, just as the dragon spewed its green poison breath. The two streams of power collided violently until the monster took a direct hit, was miserably defeated, and completely annihilated. Our hero received a double stat increase, as expected of an S-rank dungeon. In addition, he also gained 50 points from the Sigil of Responsibility, a side effect of the Sigil of Hope. Unlike the other sigil, this one didn't drain his energy, and he wondered where that sigil had come from. When it was all over, he received the Sigil of the Soul, a high-level reward. However, he didn't see any noticeable change in his appearance and wondered if he could now use Masubara's power. Just then, Kana appeared, calling his name loudly and throwing her arms around him. The reincarnated hero showed that he was all right, easing the worries of his little sister, who had just realized how much stronger her brother had suddenly become. How much? Nozomi asked if letting the enemy lower its guard was part of the plan. Maguru replied that it wasn't. He just suddenly felt a surge of power that he himself didn't fully understand yet. He promised to explain it to her after he'd looked into it thoroughly, but for now, he wanted to leave this place immediately. Even though he didn't fully grasp what had happened, he was still happy they had cleared the entire dungeon. While Maguru was contacting the branch manager of the Hunters Guild, let's go back to what happened 8 hours earlier. Futaba and Hidaka watched the hunters land from the plane and thought to themselves that the time had come. Somewhere in the city center, a few skeletons were clawing at a fence, attracting the attention of a guard. Futaba, the one controlling the skeletons, tricked the guard and cast a spell to finish him off. She took him down because he dared to touch her with his filthy hands. Just then, she gave a wicked smirk and said that the real fun was just beginning. If they could get to the evacuation camp, they would be able to contact each other. Nozomi suggested they head for the airport, though Maguru thought the distance was too far. Despite his objections, the group still headed to the evacuation camp, where they came across countless injured people. Kana was horrified by the sight. Meanwhile, Izumi remarked bitterly that the wounds inflicted by monsters were truly impossible to heal. Kana, his little sister, realized he was speaking from his own experience. As soon as he entered a tent, Maguru asked the group of hunters about the extent of the damage. They explained that the situation was critical, with countless people injured and a lack of healers, leaving them unsure of what to do. Although Izumi wanted to help, he felt powerless because he was just a jobless, and this task was completely beyond his capabilities even for an expert like Kana. The scale of this tragedy seemed too large to control. At that moment, Kana asked to borrow Maguru's magical power. She explained that her own magic was running out, and so she desperately needed his help. She clarified that while healers aren't great at directly restoring vitality, they are extremely skilled at exchanging magical power. This meant they could turn the situation around by drawing magic from others and distributing it to those in need. Suddenly, the wounds of everyone present began to heal, leaving the injured completely stunned and calling it a miracle. Kana turned to thank Maguru, telling him that the credit belonged to him, because it was your own magic that created that miracle. Izumi was incredibly impressed, thinking that even with enough mana he could never do something like that. At the same time, heaping praise on his little sister Nozomi's incredible achievement, he pulled her into a celebratory hug for having healed everyone after a moment of relieved sighs. Maguru announced that the monsters would no longer appear, revealing to the hunters that he, Kana, and Izumi had conquered the dungeon. Everyone listened in surprise as he explained that someone must have killed Masubara, which was the reason the dungeon went berserk and spawned the monsters, while those present wondered who could have done that to the former hero. Maguro theorized, though unconfirmed, that it was a fake Masubara left behind by Hidaka. With this complicated situation, he couldn't think of any other wicked enemy. The hunters expressed their gratitude, acknowledging the strength of Japanese hunters like Maguru. For his part, he was about to contact the hunter's guild master to report the situation when he suddenly received 2 voice messages. Listening to the first message, he heard the guild master shouting that something extremely serious had just happened. The second message announced that Futaba and Hidaka had appeared in the central district with a plan, and right after that, thousands of S-rank dungeons had sprouted all over Tokyo. The guild master then apologized for asking Izumi and Maguro to return immediately, even though they were exhausted. The message revealed that 7 hours ago, Hidaka and Futaba had arrived in this district to take the first step in their plan, initiating Hidaka's final scheme. He mentioned the shattered magic stones scattered all over Japan, and because of that, there was no other way but to find and collect every single piece. However, Hidaka declared that he was completely different from the other heroes. After summoning a horde of monsters, he ordered them to transport the magic stones across Japan. His strategy was perfectly clear. By using the immense magical power within these stones to bring them to the surface, the fragments would automatically gather around the ruins of the Sky Dungeon. Regarding his ambition, Hidaka knew he just had to sit and wait for the magic stone fragments to obediently fall into his hands. Futaba was incredibly impressed and took out her phone to take a picture of the magic stones. 1 hour later, she asked how much longer it would take for the plan to be completed, and Hidaka estimated about 6 hours. Looking annoyed, Futaba decided to head back to the hotel, telling him to call her if anything happened, and he needed her to come back. Finding her attitude childish, Hidaka said goodbye to her to act alone. Hidaka knew that the Japanese hunters, including Maguro, were still busy in China. As long as nothing serious happened, he believed he could handle everything by himself. He could feel the moment he would become a god was not far off. Suddenly, the ruins of the Sky Dungeon in the district began to glow. This dungeon had collapsed hundreds of years ago, but its ruins still remain to this day. Furthermore, there were traces of Hidaka and Futaba's presence nearby, although at this moment people could only see that fat guy. The guildmaster warned that it was highly likely the former hero Hidaka was involved in this matter, and right now, Maguro's team was the only one they could trust to resolve the situation. Finally, the hunter team arrived in Tokyo. Nozomi asked Maguro if he could fight, since his sword was broken. Maguro, our hero, recalled the moment the dragon's attack had destroyed his weapon. Luckily, Izumi still had a magic stone and had managed to forge another sword identical to the broken one. Moguru, the protagonist, took the new sword, and then everyone activated anti-gravity magic to fly to the location. But at that very moment, the reincarnator Moguru confronted Hidaka after a long time. The former hero Hidaka was completely taken by surprise at Maguro's sudden appearance. The sheer speed of the protagonist's arrival left him utterly bewildered. From Hidaka's reaction, Meguro realized that he was the one behind Masubara's death. However, Hidaka was still confident in his victory. He believed he had already won, and there was nothing Meguro could do to stop him anymore. Grasping the situation, Meguro knew he had to eliminate Hidaka to crush his scheme. Without a moment's hesitation, Meguro activated the sigil on his hand, instantly terrifying his enemy. Just then, a series of Meguru's clones appeared, along with countless copies of Masubara. Hidaka now grew desperate, realizing he only needed a little more time for his plan to be a roaring success. Noticing his enemy's panic, Meguro called on the two girls Nozomi and Kana to land the finishing blow and end this battle as quickly as possible. The three of them quickly armed themselves. The sigil on Meguro's hand glowed brightly as he prepared to cast his magic, erupting with a powerful aura. Meguro charged towards the enemy, while Kana was chanting a spell and Nozomi was by his side. The power of the clones had depended directly on the amount of mana Hidaka poured into them. Although having many clones seemed like an advantage at first glance, splitting his mana among 5 bodies actually made each individual weaker. Nozomi threw her axe towards one of the clones, but he deftly caught the weapon and countered. The clone swung the axe, nearly splitting the girl in two, but she managed to dodge. However, he followed up with another attack. Nozomi had to block the blow with her shield, then used that same shield to knock the clone away. As the clone tried to seize the opportunity to strike again, Meguro appeared and slammed him to the ground. As the clones were gradually defeated, Hidaka's desperation grew. Only 2 clones remained, and one of them held a giant shield. One of the 2 girls, probably. Nozomi charged forward to attack him with her weapon, but was blocked by that massive shield. The clone smirked and used his own shield to smash into the girl, sending her flying. Immediately after, she took a direct punch that sent her flying even further, leaving her heavily injured. She realized that the clones in Japan were stronger than the ones back in China, and wondered what the hell was going on when he saw the 5 copies get back up even more energetic than before. One of the copies launched a fire-type spell at Meguro, but he dodged it with ease. Meguro noticed the power of the spells they could cast and wondered why they didn't attack with their full strength afterwards. He decided to use his most powerful skills to end this battle. Once and for all, he cast a spell calling sharp spikes to rise from the ground. The shield-wielding copy hurriedly defended against the attack, and Meguro took advantage of that defensive posture to rush forward. Attacking from below, where the target had no line of sight, his attack only left a small cut on the copy's arm. Its skin was astonishingly tough. Meguro wondered why the copy had switched to attacking when its defense was so good. It should have just ignored his blow and attacked him head-on with its sword. Pondering the possible reasons, he came up with a few theories to confirm his hypothesis. Meguro decided to test something and drew his sword. While the 2 girls took out their phones, he cast a low-to-the-ground spell which created a massive wall of ice, splitting the copies apart, and the trio moved in to attack them. Meguro charged at 2 of the copies. He swung his sword, knocking them down and dealing significant damage. When one of them attacked him with a flimsy sword, Meguro parried the blow, broke the weapon in 2, and then powerfully threw the copy away. The remaining copy tried to throw a punch, but Meguro countered with a spell. A giant ice spike pierced through the middle of the copy's body. The message Meguro sent the girls was about dividing the enemy with a barrier spell, and with Kana's support magic he could advance on the enemy while Nozomi defended with her shield. The 2 girls fought with much better synchronization when facing the 2 copies. Kana neutralized one of the copy's spells by grabbing its fingers and disabling the incantation at that very moment. Nozomi seized the opening to swing her sword, striking down the enemy. With Meguro's plan, they managed to defeat the toughest copies. It seemed these imposters didn't possess a balanced stats. One had good attack power but was fragile, while the one using powerful magic was weak in other aspects. Instead of being well-rounded, they only excelled in specific areas. Meguro's strategy was simple: expose their weaknesses and focus on their flaws. He believed he had completely figured out how these copies worked. He declared that such petty tricks wouldn't work on him, and that Hidaka had underestimated the trio. Meanwhile, Hidaka was trying to buy another 5 minutes, considering his plan to be perfect. But anticipating it wouldn't be completely effective, he had prepared additional countermeasures, treating this situation as a test. Meguro now had a firm grasp on the enemy's stats, making the copies disappear. Hidaka declared that Meguro's chance of winning was 0%. Our hero Meguro replied that they'd have to see how the fight played out, using the counterfeit ability badge, which also allowed him to use the copy power on himself. Hidaka took the crystal and through it created countless copies of himself. Maguru found this act ridiculous as he had already anticipated it, and believing the result would be the same, he chanted and threw several fireballs at the cumbersome copies. Amidst the smoke and dust, the remaining copies used the crystal and summoned a giant monster. The counterattack took the form of a terrifying giant centipede that charged at our protagonist, delivering an incredibly fast and powerful tail whip. It caught him by surprise. Furthermore, countless skeletons began to be summoned from spatial gates, making Maguru momentarily fearful, thinking he wouldn't be able to dodge in time as the horde of skeletons swarmed him. They piled on top of him, crushing him. However, our hero suddenly burst up, throwing the undead horde off. Hidaka then remarked that he had too many wasted movements. He declared that there was no need for an overly tough defense or heavy attacks because as long as he maintained balance, he would surely win. Maguru noticed that Hidaka only focused his defense on the points that would receive an attack, which posed a huge problem, because Hidaka was using magic drawn from the stone to summon his copies. If he could use this ability indefinitely, the longer the battle dragged on, the more disadvantaged the trio would be. A skeleton charged at Maguru, and he immediately launched a counterattack, realizing it was impossible to destroy such a huge number of monsters. He decided to play his trump card and asked Hidaka if he had ever heard of a true clone from the Soul Seal. This was a new seal Maguru had obtained after conquering Masubara's dungeon. He automatically understood how to use it, and a glowing red seal appeared on the back of his hand. All he needed now was the extraction stone, the exact same kind of stone that Masubara once used to clone Japan. Unlike Hidaka, Maguru didn't have the ability to create copies of other people. However, in the current situation, his own unique power proved to be far superior in combat, and he began to activate the seal. Maguru shot towards the enemy, unleashing the skill he had acquired from Masubara after clearing the dungeon. This utterly shocked Hidaka, as he had never heard of this technique, and he never expected to face a copy of Maguru. The first Maguru cast an extremely powerful purple spell, while the second Maguru rushed forward, slashing directly at the giant centipede with his sword. With this synchronized combination, they landed a critical blow on the giant centipede. The girls felt that what Maguru was doing was truly unbelievable. They wondered which one was the real Izumi, and they were convinced that the real one was the swordsman who had just jumped in front of them to protect them. Maguru then explained that Hidaka's seal belonged to the summoning school of magic, but both versions of Maguru here were real. It was just that the nature of their powers was slightly different. To put it simply, Maguru explained that he had just split himself into two halves in that instant. Both of them simultaneously gathered their magic to summon a lightning strike of terrifying destructive power, then charged straight at the enemy. With two versions of himself, his power was also multiplied. That power was proven in practice when one of the two unleashed a powerful bolt of lightning at the centipede, obliterating it with a single spell. Even Hidaka was caught in the blast and sent flying, and our protagonist immediately slipped behind him, starting to take full advantage of his specialized stats as Maguru swung his sword, slashing through Hidaka's body. He finished off the former hero's clone, leaving only the original trembling in fear. A strike with such high precision and specialization is incredibly dangerous, but Maguru wanted to overwhelm him with a skill of pure power instead. He had exposed the enemy's critical weakness, and in that instant Maguru succeeded in tearing off one of Hidaka's arms. Maguru scoffed. Saying this victory was much easier than he'd imagined, he left Hidaka to sink into a pit of despair upon realizing he had lost an arm, pointing his sword straight at his face. He roared, demanding that he reveal Futaba's whereabouts. Suddenly, Maguru sensed a surge of magic entering an overloaded state. Just then, the process of crystallizing, Hidaka's magic was officially complete. He began to laugh maniacally loudly, proclaiming that he was the one who had won this battle. He tried to crawl towards his magic crystal, but our protagonist wasn't about to let him get his way. Maguru mercilessly finished off the villain with a stab through the back. The girls were left utterly stunned by the brutal sight. After sending Hidaka to his grave, Maguru strode over to the magic crystal and held it firmly in his palm. The system panel immediately displayed a notification asking if he wanted to use this magic crystal to absorb divinity. Our protagonist didn't even understand what absorbing divinity meant when the villain groaned his name, begging him to hand over the crystal. Maguru was a bit surprised to see him still clinging to life after taking a fatal blow. Hidaka rasped that the item was completely useless in Maguru's hands and told him to be a good boy and hand it over. Maguru coldly replied that whether it was useful or not was for him to decide, and so he asked what this item could do that made Hidaka desire it so desperately. He declared that his decision would depend on his answer, and that he would consider his enemy's plea even as the man lay grievously wounded, gasping for every breath. Hidaka still managed to reveal that this crystal had the power to help him become a god. Not letting Meguru delay any further, he ordered him to hand it. Over immediately, no questions asked. Meguru could sense that giving the crystal to his enemy was an incredibly stupid idea, and so he flatly rejected the villain's request. Seeing this, Hidaka told Meguru to take a look around, to see that the spatial distortions caused by the crystal's appearance had begun to form new dungeons. He warned that if they continued to be affected by the crystal, for much longer these dungeons would soon be fully formed. Hidaka argued that Japan didn't have nearly enough military might to clear out the massive number of dungeons about to appear. For that very reason, he didn't want to witness anymore meaningless sacrifices, and he desired to ascend to godhood to eradicate these threats with his own hands. Meguru coldly snapped at him to shut up, though in his heart he had to admit that without divine intervention, there was truly no easy way to resolve this mess. Even so, he couldn't just stand by and watch his enemy ascend to the throne and become the supreme being. Instead of entrusting the lives of tens of thousands of people to a villain like Hidaka, Meguru decided that he himself would be the one to ascend to godhood. In that very moment, Meguru decisively pressed the yes button on the system panel. However, he was notified that the process of becoming a god had failed, because he was not qualified. Hidaka explained that only a dungeon master could become a god. He warned that if the dungeons were ignored, monsters would pour out and invade the earth. Hidaka demanded to know if Meguru would let everyone die just because of his decision, and he compared the situation to Meguru slaughtering them with his own 2 hands. Meguru was at a loss, not knowing what to do. He didn't want to give the crystal to Hidaka, but he also realized that if he didn't, there was no other way to turn this completely hopeless situation around. He looked at Hidaka, who was smugly waiting for him to hand over the crystal. In the end, it seemed there was no other way out. At that very moment, a portal appeared right behind Kana. Skeletons rushed out trying to grab the little girl's leg. Hidaka pressured Meguru to decide quickly if he didn't want her to get hurt. However, before Meguru could make his move, Hidaka took a fatal sword strike to the head and died. Our protagonist, Meguru, declares that harming Kana is a crime he will never forgive. Filled with indignation, he finished Hidaka off with his sword. Now that the former dungeon hero has been eliminated, Meguru wonders what to do next. He considers giving the magic crystal to another master so they can ascend to godhood. He thinks of Futaba, but after reconsidering, he quickly dismisses the idea. Knowing she's nothing but trouble, Kana suggests the 3 of them put their heads together to find a solution to the problem. The moment Meguru hands the crystal to his little sister, the artifact resonates and glows brilliantly in her hands. Kana says that she might be able to do something with this magical item, and tells him to entrust it to her. Our protagonist complies. Suddenly, countless strange memories flood the little girl's mind. She guesses these are from her past life, and begins to receive the memories of Saintess Kana. Although she doesn't remember every detail precisely, she feels that if she merges with those memories, she can turn the current situation around. First, she needs to understand the flow of magical power emanating from the crystal. After understanding and feeling the movement of the energy flow, she will shape and condense it. Suddenly, they realize the crystal's magic has weakened and the dungeons are starting to disappear. Everyone presses Kana, asking what she did. She explains that it's a seal used to suppress the magic escaping from the crystal. Then she sealed all that magic away. Meguru asks his sister where she learned to do that. Kana replies that as soon as she touched the crystal, memories of her past life flooded her mind. Although she wasn't very confident, she gave it a try and successfully sealed the crystal into the dungeons. The protagonist believes this is the power from her past life, and it makes perfect sense that Saintess Kana could do this. However, it seems her memories haven't fully recovered yet. Meguru decides to put that aside for now, since it was effective at least, and he doesn't forget to thank his sister for saving him. Just then, Meguru gets a call from the branch manager who had been watching the entire live broadcast. The branch manager congratulates him on his incredibly impressive performance. But he also warns that it's still too early to let their guard down. After all, even though the former hero Hidaka has been eliminated, that woman Futaba is still alive. Grinning, Meguru thinks that since he's beaten her once before, finding her whereabouts will be a piece of cake. However, the branch manager says over the phone that they already have Futaba's location. Meanwhile, Futaba is standing on the rooftop of a building, glued to the camera feed from her drone. She realizes the situation is much tougher than she anticipated because she never expected that group of 3 to be so strong. With her accomplice just finished off, she knows full well that she's the next target. Realizing she needs to get out of there as fast as possible, she takes off running. As she's frantically trying to escape, she suddenly runs into the police tape cordoning off the scene just as she's trying to get out of the area. A giant fireball appears and hurtles straight towards her. Izumi yells, asking if they were just going to let Futaba get away, and Futaba realizes she's cornered. She notices Muguru is alone and his comrades haven't arrived yet. She's certain he's just stalling for time, waiting for his backup to arrive. But to her surprise, Muguru boldly declares he will eliminate her himself right here and now. Futaba lets out a mocking smile, challenging whether Muguru is really confident enough to face her alone, while asserting that his power is no match for her. In response, the villainess flies into a rage, screaming at them not to underestimate her, and immediately unleashes a barrage of magic spells. However, our hero shows incredible agility, dodging every attack without a scratch. Spotting an old woman on the street, Futaba doesn't hesitate to aim her magic at the innocent bystander. Acting on instinct, Muguru moves in a flash, turning his back to the attack to shield the old woman. A barrage of spells slams into him and explodes right on his back, as he holds her tight to save her. Futaba bursts out laughing, mocking Muguru and scoffing that he's a huge disappointment as he collapses to the ground. She declares this ending is so boring, and Muguru realizes the villainess is gloating. To Futaba's astonishment, Muguru is standing right behind her. He reveals that the fallen body was just a clone. He asserts that the real Muguru is the one standing here. Using a soul sigil, he had summoned a copy of himself to trick her and buy time. The villainess becomes absolutely furious because no one told her he had the ability to create clones like that. Of course, our hero is under no obligation to explain. He immediately rushes straight at Futaba. Muguru charges the villainess at high speed while she retaliates by launching magic spells to counterattack. He summons countless fireballs, but Futaba blocks them with a magic shield. Next, he draws his sword and unleashes a series of slashes that nearly hit their mark. However, the enemy dodges all the blows with incredible agility. Even so, Muguru notices that after dodging so many attacks, she's clearly showing signs of fatigue. Seeing this, he decides to attack her once more, knowing his chances have increased. Just then, Nozomi appears running side by side with Muguru, our reincarnated hero. She suggests setting a trap to corner Futaba from both sides, ever since touching the mana crystal. The healer has learned a ton of new skills, and the magic she just cast is proof of that. As she strikes her staff firmly on the ground, a huge source of energy begins to radiate outwards, and Futaba also notices the arrival of the 2 girls. The villainess screams that seeing happy girls makes her blood boil, and she intends to wipe them both out. Therefore, she unleashes a barrage of homing explosive spells towards Nozomi. The guided magic missile explodes, but Nozomi manages to protect herself in time and takes no damage whatsoever. Through the thick smoke, she charges straight at the villainess, who is stunned to see her completely unscathed. Nozomi then unleashes a sword strike, but it's blocked by Futaba's shield. However, Moguro had circled around behind her to cut her off, and Futaba was completely unaware of his presence. And a century ago, one of the reasons Nozomi was chosen as a dungeon challenger was because, in addition to being a healer, she was also an outstanding high-level guardian. Because of this, Nozomi could keep advancing without any difficulty or worry, because right at that moment, Nozomi suddenly appeared from behind her, swinging her sword and landing a precise strike on her arm. Muguru landed a magic-infused punch right into Futaba's back. The villain took heavy damage and was sent flying by his explosive power, but even so, Futaba wasn't dead yet. Meanwhile, Nozomi and Muguru once again tightened their circle around her. She began to despair, knowing full well that if the fight continued like this, she would certainly be killed. Though she hated to use it as it wasn't her style, she realized this was no time to be picky, and so she activated the mark on her hand. Our protagonist and his comrades also decided to end the battle right at this very moment. After activating the mark, pitch-black wings sprouted from the villain's back, and she dashed away, dodging Nozomi's attack with terrifying speed. The enemy vanished, then suddenly reappeared on top of a traffic light. She then transformed into a formidable creature with pitch-black eyes, sharp claws, and enormous wings. Futaba was furious at having to use a power that made her look so hideous. Suddenly she took flight, hovering in the air. She chanted and launched a magic missile toward the 2 of them, but it was blocked by Izumi Muguru's blade. Before they could react, Futaba, in her demonic form, lunged forward with extreme hatred, unleashing a flurry of lightning-fast attacks and landing a punch on Nozomi. The blow sent the healer flying a great distance. The force of it was so great that it knocked her unconscious. Muguru thought to himself that enhancing one's power through transformation was one thing, but those wings were the real problem. Our hero had been certain that he'd turned the tables into a 3-on-1 battle, but after this transformation, they no longer held the combat advantage. Realizing this, Muguru knew they had no chance of winning unless he could sever her wings. Just then, Nozomi woke up and asked how they were going to do that. Muguru had no plan, nor did he know if they even had a chance of pulling off such a miracle. Thanks to the Soul Seal, he now understood how to activate these marks, activating the Soul Seal on his hand. Muguru felt that with this power, he could take care of the villain. Muguru knew that if he didn't finish Futaba within 300 seconds, he would be the one to die. But that prospect didn't faze him at all, because he could see the path to victory. Through her own mark, Kana immediately used support magic to strengthen both warriors Muguru and Nozomi. With these buffs and the activated marks, Muguru's spells became significantly more powerful. As she took the hits, Futaba wondered just how many marks Muguru possessed. Still, she defended herself with a magic shield. Was confident that level of attack couldn't even scratch her. But when she felt the impact, the villain realized Muguru's marks didn't seem to be anything special. Just then, Nozomi surprised her by rushing in at blinding speed with a charged-up attack. Her comrades Muguru and Kana put all their faith in Nozomi's strike. She swung her sword, unleashing a slash with all her might. However, Nozomi's attack missed its mark as Futaba dodged with keen agility. She immediately countered, landing a direct hit to Nozomi's stomach. Nozomi was sent flying backward and began to fall from a dangerous height. Without hesitation, Muguru launched himself between the buildings. He caught the girl in his arms, saving her and landing safely. Nozomi had only managed to withstand the villain's attack thanks to Kana's protective barrier. Nozomi asked Kana to heal her while she had an opening. Then she apologized for missing the villain. Izumi Muguru thanked Nozomi because now he completely understood Futaba's special ability. As for the villain, she flew straight towards the building where they were hiding. Though surprised by their attacks, she still deemed them insufficient and mockingly asked if that was all the power they had. Muguru thought about the Hope Seal, which had no side effects but could only be used once a day. Now he would have to rely entirely on the Duty Seal, which he was sure would be enough. After all, there were still a full 60 seconds left. He began to dive from the top of the building. Feeling it was time to act, he dodged Futaba's spells and launched his ice crystals. Finally, he channeled his power for an extremely strong sword strike, but it was blocked by her magic shield. The two were locked in a struggle of power, and when Futaba realized she was losing, she began to fly upwards. As long as she could maintain distance, she'd have the advantage. So she continued to fly higher and higher. Facing a barrage of incoming spells, Muguru boldly declared that she wasn't the only one who could fly. Using the power from his mark, he shot up from the building to Futaba's level, unleashing a lightning-fast strike that she couldn't predict or dodge in time. As a result, one of Futaba's wings was severed and she began to freefall from the sky. She slammed hard into the ground, sustaining critical injuries. Our protagonist had used anti-gravity magic, a skill that consumed a massive amount of mana but was decisive. In that life-or-death moment, he had gained the upper hand and created an opening, seizing the chance to injure the villain and take one of her wings. Now the situation had returned to a 3-on-1 with Futaba collapsed and completely unable to fight. The enemy began to cry out in desperation, begging them not to take her life as she cried and reverted to her original form. She sobbed, pleading to be spared. Izumi Muguru smirked, pretending he would grant her request. The very moment a flicker of hope appeared in her eyes, our hero showed his true hand. There was no way he would spare her. In her desperation, she swore she would do anything to live and began to remove her clothes. But our hero had not the slightest interest in her offer. He coldly finished her off, thrusting his sword through the chest of the former hero Futaba, thus completing his revenge. Looking at the Duty Seal on his hand, Muguru's vision began to blur, and he felt so exhausted he was about to collapse. His two comrades Kana and Nozomi ran to support him gently, telling him he did a great job. Afterwards, the three of them returned to the Hunters Association where the guildmaster poured them coffee. He invited them in and apologized for letting the three of them fight in such a way. But he also didn't forget to congratulate them on their impressive performance. Upon seeing the magic crystal, the guildmaster suggested that the association keep it. However, Muguru decided that they would keep the crystal themselves. Although the guildmaster was reluctant to admit it, he would still rather trust this young man than that association. Even when sealed, the magic crystal does not lose its effect. If the seal is broken, countless dungeons will once again descend upon this world. There are two known ways to break this seal. The first way is if Kana voluntarily undoes it, and the second way is if Kana is killed. However, they cannot control whether other methods exist or not. Keeping the crystal with them is the safest option for now. Moreover, other hero groups will surely hunt for this item. Muguru knows that keeping the crystal will attract vicious enemies, and that is exactly what he wants, because it will give him an advantage. Nozomi then asked what they should do now. The director explained that when a dungeon master is destroyed, their dungeon will collapse within 2 weeks. If the local hunters can't handle it, they will have to clear the area themselves. The prospect of facing 2 S-rank dungeons at the same time startled Nozomi and Izumi's sister. The director concluded that they should discuss the situation with the local authorities. First and for now, they should rest. Meanwhile, on a global scale, the ancient heroes began to awaken to new realities. In Peru, one such hero discovered that Muguru had just been reincarnated. At the same time in Chile, a female ancient hero also learned of Kana's return, and in Egypt, another ancient hero also became aware of these events. All of them quickly realized Muguru's potential and the terrifying truth that sigils could be stolen. The hero in Peru, revealed to be Tsurumi, prepared for his departure. Carrying his bow and arrows, he plotted a course to Paris first, then to Tokyo, firmly asserting that he would resolve this situation. As for the female hero, she realized that the stone mentioned was in fact the magic crystal. Although she considered Hidaka to be useless in a way, he had saved her some of the effort of searching for the crystal. Moreover, everyone noticed that Muguru could use Masubara's sigil, and the question of how he did it remained a mystery. The woman noted that they had brushed Sarashi aside, and Tsurumi must have realized this as well. Soon, she decided to follow a route from London, flying directly to Tokyo. 4 days later in Tokyo, she finally arrived and found it strange that a magic spell had been cast to drive people away from the area. Suddenly, an explosion came at her, and she blocked it with her magic shield. The explosion originated from a golden arrow shot by Tsurumi. She had anticipated his presence, but Tsurumi had coincidentally discovered she was coming to Tokyo, so he followed her. He remarked that this greeting was a bit rude, after all this time apart. The archer activated the sigil on his hand and unleashed a rain of arrows, declaring that sooner or later they would have to eliminate each other. Despite once being comrades, using the hero sigil, he launched a direct magical assault, although it was just magic enhanced by the sigil. However, the terrifying speed and the sheer number of arrows made the situation extremely dangerous. In response, the female mage activated her own sigil of wisdom and great magic, draining mana from the ley lines and nature. She gathered everything into a large fireball, launching this massive energy sphere towards the archer. He tried to block the attack with a few arrows, but realized it was futile to stop such an absurd spell. He began to flee the scene just as the spell crashed down on the spot where he had just been standing. Everything exploded, creating terrifying destruction. She realized Tsurumi possessed superior agility to her and concluded that in a one-on-one fight, she probably wouldn't easily win or lose. It was still too early to predict the outcome of this battle, but suddenly the archer sprouted black wings. Using the sage sigil, he manifested giant wings and a hideous demonic form when he activated them. He began to glide through the air and charged up a huge glowing arrow, finally launching it with the power of lightning. The arrow radiated energy, piercing the female mage's shoulder. It caused her excruciating pain, and her body convulsed from the electric shock. The archer, satisfied with his attack, decided to leave the battle for now and flew away. He left the female mage behind, filled with absolute resentment. She vowed she would never forgive him. Meanwhile, elsewhere, our main character's teacher was asking who had cleared the newly appeared dungeon. Kana noted that the phone call was about Hidaka and Futaba's dungeons, and it seemed Tsurumi and Kawasaki were the ones responsible for clearing these dungeons, and it's suspected that they are targeting the inherited sigil. Tozomi added that photos of Muguru carrying Masubara's sigil had been circulating online. In any case, this hero has become stronger, and they decided they should share what they know with everyone. Muguru then recalled what had happened on the first floor of the Sky Dungeon in his past life. Back then, he had asked Kawasaki to be more serious, but she was reluctant and couldn't be bothered to try. Her magic was powerful, and she believed that others had to clear the way so she could cast her spells. However, Muguru only asked her to cooperate with the group a little, more a request that was not unreasonable at all. Instead, she blamed Kana, saying the girl did nothing but stand next to the main character and was completely useless to the team. Izumi, upon hearing this, became incredibly angry. While they were discussing Tsurumi, there was a knock on the door late at night. Suddenly, Tsurumi himself appeared at Muguru's door. Without even a "long time no see," Muguru didn't hesitate to ask why he was there, drawing his sword and attacking immediately, unwilling to waste this surprise opportunity. Meanwhile, the girls, on the other hand, thought it might be one of Muguru's fans, since he had become so famous after the live stream that he even had an avid female fan club. Kana got up, deciding to see who could be knocking at this late hour, and Nozomi went with her. As they stepped out of the room, they saw our hero in a fierce battle with the archer. They immediately recognized the former bow hero, the one who was part of the group of 6 from hundreds of years ago. Tsurumi spoke up, saying he didn't come here to fight Muguru, and begged him to stop. Our hero ceased his attack. He pressed the tip of his sword to Tsurumi's neck and asked what his real purpose was. The archer revealed that he had discovered Muguru was a reincarnated person and that he came here to apologize for what happened 100 years ago. Muguru didn't believe his apology and suspected he had malicious intent. He pressed him, asking if Tsurumi was trying to get him to lower his guard for a sneak attack. For Izumi, this former hero had gone too far, and his crime couldn't be erased by a mere apology. When Izumi told him to go atone in the afterlife, Muguru prepared to swing his sword once more. Despite facing Izumi's deadly blade, Tsurumi still shouted, insisting that he had protested the other's crime until the very last moment. However, he revealed that he had been forced. If he had stood up to protect Muguru and his sister, he would have been killed too, so he had no other choice. Kana then intervened, holding Izumi back and asking him to please give Tsurumi a chance at least to hear his explanation. Muguru's heart softened, and he decided to give him a chance, lowering his sword. They sat down to talk, and Izumi asked the reason for the archer's visit. Tsurumi replied that he came to apologize for abandoning the 2 siblings and turning a blind eye as they were murdered. As a hero, he should have been an example for others, but instead, he committed an unforgivable crime. He admitted that the excuse of being threatened was truly pathetic, and that was why he was here, ready to bear the responsibility for what happened to the 2 of them. Muguru stood up and declared it was time for Tsurumi to pay for his sins. The archer argued that killing him now wouldn't change anything. Izumi agreed, but admitted that it would at least make him feel better. Moreover, it would eliminate one more threat hanging over his sister Kana. He mulled over the thought that even if he eliminated Tsurumi Kawasaki or Sarashi, there were still other heroes, some even stronger than this archer. For this very reason, Tsurumi didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, he offered to help Izumi get his revenge, promising to reveal everything about the other heroes and do whatever was necessary. When it was all over, Izumi would have full authority to deal with him. Whether he lived or died would be his decision. Izumi Muguru then drew his sword and declared he would finish the former hero right here and now. Tsurumi was terrified, but the blade didn't fall. Muguru was just testing to see if he would be a trustworthy ally. This meant that he trusted Tsurumi, albeit not completely, and accepted his offer. For Tsurumi, that was more than enough, and he promised to use his honorable actions to prove his words weren't empty. The next day, he would accompany them to the Hunter Association to share the information he had. The archer nodded in agreement. A while later, the girls asked Izumi how much of Tsurumi's story he believed. Our hero replied that at the very least, Tsurumi also wanted to defeat the other heroes. As for what tricks he might pull after that remained to be seen. But as long as their goals were aligned, everything would be fine. Nozomi was surprised by Muguru's unusual calmness. He explained that Tsurumi wasn't strong enough to make him feel threatened, even after exchanging just a few blows. Muguru had realized that his stats completely overwhelmed the archers. Even if Tsurumi were to betray him, he still had more than enough power to finish him in the blink of an eye. It was this absolute confidence that helped Izumi. Muguru maintained his composure. Meanwhile, in a D-rank dungeon, a giant scorpion was lunging at and tearing into a hunter. That hunter was empowered by his pink-haired girlfriend named Minami, and unleashed a critical blow, killing the purple scorpion. The 2 of them, a couple deeply in love, left the dungeon just in time for dinner. He was planning to propose to Minami after their meal. In the midst of his nervousness, he suddenly sensed someone approaching. Kawasaki appeared, remarking that it wasn't bad at all for just 2 people to conquer a D-rank dungeon. She said that the man had met the standard, but Minami had failed the test. The man was irritated by the sorceress's sudden appearance, having no idea what she was rambling on about. Immediately after, Kawasaki used the Seal of Wisdom and ordered him to become her puppet. Being manipulated, Conqueror obediently complied with the woman's command, leaving Minami completely stunned. Under her magic, Conqueror stood up and uttered a curse at the very woman he loved. Next, Kawasaki ordered Conqueror to finish off his pink-haired girlfriend with his own hands. Overwhelmed by Kawasaki's mind control magic, he obediently submitted and plunged his sword through his girlfriend's chest. The former hero craved 3 more puppets like this to manipulate as she pleased. Meanwhile, at the Hunter Association, Izumi Meguro brought Tsurumi to meet the Guildmaster. Meguro hoped the Guildmaster would trust him, affirming that no matter what happened, he would quell the situation immediately. The Guildmaster understood the situation and decided to grant Izumi full authority to handle it. Our hero made it clear that he was only doing this because he saw the value in using the archer and had absolutely not forgiven his sins from 100 years ago. Afterward, he demanded that Tsurumi reveal all the information he possessed. Izumi hoped that Kawasaki and Shirashi didn't yet know that they had joined forces with Tsurumi, so that the archer could act as a double agent, using the situation to their advantage to take them down. However, the archer seemed to be troubled by something he had completely forgotten to tell them. Kawasaki had already anticipated this. This angered the chairman, and Tsurumi quickly explained that recently he had fought a battle with Ha. He wanted to bring back proof for Izumi to show he wasn't lying, but he let Ha get away. However, she still doesn't know that Tsurumi and Meguro have teamed up. Now, with a 4-against-1 advantage in this fight, they'll have an easier time winning. But Kana still warned that they absolutely must not let their guard down. Meguro then asked the chairman to investigate her whereabouts. However, the archer Tsurumi spoke up, saying that wasn't necessary. He explained that Kawasaki's magical energy still lingered on the wound, allowing them to pinpoint her exact location. The only problem now is choosing the right time to strike, and they decide to act tomorrow. Although some thought that was too slow, Meguro reminded them that Nozomi is busy today, and it would be very rude to make her cancel plans with her friends. Tsurumi completely agreed, since Meguro also saw this as the best option. The archer then revealed more about Kawasaki's terrifying abilities, emphasizing that the longer they wait, the more dangerous she'll become. He revealed that her unique skill is hypnotic, magic which can control people like soulless puppets. Meanwhile, in a B-rank dungeon, Nozomi and her friends were engaged in a fierce battle with a giant Oros. Thanks to the group's support magic, Nozomi, the girl with pink hair, dashed behind the enemy. However, the Oros sensed her approach and immediately counterattacked. But Nozomi easily blocked the blow with her shield, completely unharmed. In a flash, the monster took a direct hit to its back before the girl followed up with another strike, slashing its body in 2. And with that, they had successfully conquered this B-rank dungeon. Her 2 friends, Hikari and Sakura, couldn't help but be amazed by her overwhelming strength, because clearing a B-rank dungeon was usually an incredibly difficult challenge for them. Nozomi was thrilled. It had been a long time since the group fought side by side, and an indescribable joy welled up inside her. Her friends also realized she had improved immensely, and her power had clearly grown. They were overjoyed to be fighting together again, and Nozomi wanted to fully enjoy this moment, pushing aside all the worries and troubles of the day. Just then, Kawasaki appeared out of nowhere, clapping and congratulating the 3 of them for clearing the B-rank dungeon. She offered praise, saying their achievement was quite impressive. Standing behind her were 4 men under her hypnosis, their eyes soulless. Nozomi immediately recognized Kawasaki Masato, and was stunned by her sudden appearance. The sorceress arrogantly declared that Nozomi's 2 friends had both failed, and only she had passed the test, and would now become the main prize. Nozomi frowned in confusion, asking what Kawasaki meant by failed and main prize. Kawasaki smirked in response. It was exactly as she said. She would use her hypnotic magic to make Nozomi her new collectible. The 3 of them began to understand the situation, realizing the men behind her were all actual hunters, now being manipulated by the villain's magical power. Faced with the threat, Nozomi ordered Hikari and Sakura to run immediately, because the 3 of them stood no chance of defeating Kawasaki. They had to inform Izumi Meguro as quickly as possible to get help. However, Kawasaki declared that the only one she wanted was Nozomi. She then used her sigil to try and hypnotize her. Nozomi tried to resist the magic, but the effort caused an intense pain in her head. She fought back with all her mental strength, but in her mind she began to see illusions, visions of her friends accusing her of betrayal and coveting her position. However, Nozomi felt that something wasn't right, and tried to fight the magic, realizing it was all a lie. The pleas from her friends in her heart helped her stay lucid, and the girl managed to overcome the hypnotic magic. Kawasaki was astonished. She thought it was impossible, as her hypnosis sigil had never failed before. This only reinforced her belief that Nozomi was an excellent prize. Realizing this was the perfect chance to attack, the three of them charged straight at the sorceress. The villain then revealed that her magic works much better when she touches the target's head. She then lunged at Nozomi, placed a hand on her head, and the young girl immediately collapsed. Resisting the magic, Nozomi told her friends to get away from her. Just then, the sorceress ordered the girl to eliminate her own friends, straining against the hypnotic magic. Nozomi, her voice choked with emotion, once again desperately begged Hikari and Sakura to leave. The sorceress realized this process would take longer than she'd anticipated. Hikari and Sakura apologized, promising they would come back to save her later. Just then, the pink-haired girl completely fell under the spell, her expression changing drastically. Her friends then ran for their lives to Maguru's house to get help. Maguru immediately noticed Nozomi's absence and pressed them about what happened. The girls entered his house and explained that Kawasaki had kidnapped Nozomi. Then Tsurumi Yakumo, one of the 6 heroes, appeared and announced he would cooperate with them. The girls were completely shocked even after Maguru explained that there was a reason for it. Tsurumi the archer explained that their friend being hypnotized by Kawasaki was an extremely serious problem. The protagonist asked if there was any way to break the magic spell, and Tsurumi replied that unfortunately there wasn't. However, he revealed that he had a plan and a solution to this problem, which was Maguru himself. After all, he knew that Maguru possessed copy magic, and because he had the jobless class, he had no restrictions when using spells. However, Maguru couldn't copy the power of the sigils they all possessed. Even if he knew how it worked, he could only dispel a spell if he completely understood its mechanics. Tsurumi explained that only the original caster can cancel the hypnosis magic. What they should focus on now is overwriting her magic. As for Maguru, he can't do this without understanding the mechanism, and therefore, they need to figure out how this charm works. The archer then asserted that he hadn't wasted hundreds of years just doing nothing, and he knew how to complete this mission. To prove it, he took out some photos of Kawasaki's wisdom sigil, pondering the immense amount of knowledge he had gathered about her magic. The sheer depth of it truly impressed him with the amount of information and detail available. Izumi felt he could finally act after 3 intense hours of research. He had understood how the magic worked, although he knew the only way to be sure was to try it himself. The doubt about the consequences of failure worried him, because with the nature of this type of magic, a single mistake could have fatal consequences. It was at that moment that Nozomi's friends showed their courage and asked Maguru to test the magic on them. Even Kana volunteered to help her friend. As for Tsurumi, he was certain that the battle with Kawasaki was inevitable, and they couldn't afford to lose their healer. Maguru understood that he would need the help of his sister when the time came to face the sorceress. He then ordered everyone to prepare, as the plan would begin immediately. He realized the mechanism of the hypnosis magic was surprisingly simple. Maguru decided to test it on one of the girls. This magic worked by lowering a target's awareness through their mana circuit. Then a command is inserted. The content of this command is to turn that person into a subordinate. The moment she received the command, Hikari panicked and collapsed to the ground with a splitting headache. The protagonist realized that his application of the magic had failed, and it had caused the girl great pain. Even though he understood the theory perfectly, he still couldn't cast the spell precisely. But he knew it was just a matter of practice. Hikari staunchly insisted that she would endure it as many times as it took, until he succeeded. Sakura then also expressed her desire to be the next to help with the tests. Realizing they were resolute, Maguru agreed to let them continue. 1 hour later, Maguru persistently cast the spell with the command to force someone to become a servant. Finally, the spell took effect on the white-haired girl Kana. She was overjoyed, as she had been expecting this success from her big brother. In the end, Maguru dispelled the spell, ordering the person to free herself. Seeing the magic work, he prepared to find Nozomi and free her from the hypnosis spell. Meanwhile, in Shizuku, the group of hypnotized hunters was heading towards another dungeon. Kawasaki watched them, wondering if there was any other valuable loot waiting to be collected. Suddenly, a blast of magic shot towards her and a loyal Nozomi stepped forward to shield her. The spell stopped before the girl's barrier, revealing that it was cast by Muguru. Kawasaki smiled with delight that Akabane Muguru had finally appeared. She noticed he was alone and asked if he had come for revenge. However, it was just a decoy from Izumi, who had coordinated a plan with the rest of the group. The tactic was to use a clone as a distraction, while he overwrote the spell on Nozomi. Rescuing her was the top priority above any revenge, and Muguru had perfected this technique. He wouldn't fail now. Taking advantage of the moment, she turned her back to look at the clone. He cast the hypnosis spell to reverse control. The spell struck his friend, but to his astonishment, the magic suddenly vanished. In that instant, Kawasaki discovered that Muguru's real body had been hidden the entire time. Muguru explained to Tsurumi that his magic had disappeared even before he could reach Nozomi. There was no time to figure out what had happened. Muguru and the archer Tsurumi immediately grabbed their weapons, preparing to fight. Kawasaki noted the archer's presence and realized he was helping Muguru. However, she declared that the reason he sided with Izumi had nothing to do with her. The witch warned that Muguru was being deceived, reminding him that Tsurumi had once said he deeply regretted everything. The archer immediately told Muguru to ignore her because she was just trying to divide them. Just then, Kawasaki ordered her hypnotized minions to attack everyone. The pawns launched magic at Muguru, but he easily dodged it. A sword-wielding hunter charged to attack him from behind, and he managed to defend himself at the last second. Muguru didn't know how to fight them. After all, they were just being controlled. He knew the situation was troublesome, and it got even worse when his friend Nozomi charged in. While blocking her sword strike, he tried to wake her from the trance. He shouted that it was him standing right in front of her. He desperately pleaded for the girl to wake up, but Tsurumi intervened, saying it was useless, because she couldn't hear a thing right now. The sorceress Kawasaki realized they knew each other and sarcastically remarked what a ridiculous coincidence. Tsurumi said they would figure out the hypnosis later. For now, they should just take down the minions. He said this was supposed to be easy, but fending off Nozomi's attack was the hardest part of this situation. Even while hypnotized, she hadn't lost her memories and still knew all of Muguru's abilities and fighting style. She initiated a powerful clash, and at that very moment, a fireball flew straight at him. Muguru dodged it, and Nozomi seized the opportunity, circling to his side and launching a slash aimed at Izumi. His allies began to worry. The archer rushed to the rescue, dashing in front of the pink-haired girl's sword and taking the full force of the blow for Muguru. Muguru was utterly stunned to see Tsurumi sacrifice himself. For the team, Tsurumi whispered that his body had just moved on its own, and at least he had avoided a fatal blow. He added that maybe now Izumi would trust his words more, and then he immediately passed out. At that moment, Muguru ordered Kana to immediately heal the archer. With her specialized skills, Kana successfully treated Tsurumi, saving his life. Just then, Muguru realized he had lost his composure earlier. He then recognized that aside from Nozomi, none of the other minions were a real threat. When a sword-wielding hunter charged at him, Muguru sent him flying with a precise kick. Assessing the situation, Muguru concluded that if they split into two groups, they could take out the weaker enemies first. And so, his clone helped take down a weak hunter, and Muguru announced that only 3 enemies remained. However, the female mage intervened, saying that Muguru had yet to witness the amount of adrenaline truly flowing through her servant's veins. She explained that while humans normally hold back their true strength under the influence of hypnosis, they would unleash all of it. At that very moment, the hunter who had just been knocked down began to bulk up, his muscles and strength increasing frighteningly. Faced with this transformation, Muguru couldn't believe this was the strength of a mere mortal. That same hunter, now with a powerful brawny body, charged at Muguru, burning with the flames of hatred. While blocking the attack, Muguru clearly noticed that the weak hunter from before, it had become unbelievably strong. However, as he prepared to launch a second strike, the man started to spew a liquid that looked like teriyaki sauce. Suddenly he became extremely weak, and the other hunter clones started showing similar symptoms. Kawasaki sneered, declaring those servants to be completely useless while emphasizing that Nozomi was the only special one, as she was still standing. Muguru grew worried. He knew the girl had her limits and was currently holding back. The mage immediately provoked him, saying, "If you love her that much, then hand over the mana crystal," because she knew he had it. Without a moment's hesitation, Muguru declared that was impossible and that he would destroy her to save his friend. The mage retorted that he still hadn't realized the gravity of the situation, then ordered her female servant to eliminate him. At that moment, the servant tossed her shield aside and charged at Meguru with a fatal sword strike. While parrying, the main character wondered why the hypnosis wasn't working on her. Unable to find a reason, he focused on defending against his friend's attacks. At one point, Nozomi grabbed Meguru's arm and tried to land a slash on his stomach. Meguru quietly apologized to his friend and cast a spell right in her face. However, the spell didn't even leave a scratch. This was strange because at that range, it should have seriously injured her. This anomaly made Meguru realize there must be another reason for Nozomi's unusual strength. Thinking of a new approach, he envisioned a possibility and lunged forward, grabbing the girl's arm. He concluded that there must be an invisible barrier blocking his magic, a trick all too familiar to Kawasaki. Anyway, now that the mystery was solved, defeating her would be simple. Moving closer, he directly overwrote the layer of magic, touched her forehead, and ordered her to wake up. Nozomi received the command. The spell vanished and she passed out for a few seconds. Then she woke up back to her old self while being held in her friend's arms and confirmed that she was fine. She knew that Meguru would explain the details of what happened later. The female mage was stunned, unable to believe that was even possible. Tsurumi saw that the spell had worked and knew it was time to defeat Kawasaki.